Folks, what was that, Brady?
I was waving.
Oh, okay. I thought that was the go signal.
Yeah, not chopping it off.
We don't have a go signal. Anyway, welcome, folks. This is Apokalupsis Historia coming at you live in a live stream. For all you guys watching later, thanks for tuning in. Brady, you want to go ahead and give the shout outs before I give us the big intro?
Yeah, just saying thank you to all of our usual commenters, all the repeat viewers, and all of our loyal Patreons here to support our endeavor here.
Up to, like 5 or 6. Thank you guys. Anderson, hope all the music stuff's going well. I haven't really done well enough to give Anderson some shout-outs, but Anderson and Savannah, if you check out our comment threads, he's all over them. He's got his own music channel. Go check out some of his music. He does some American folk kind of, stuff that you'd hear maybe on the NPR channel, which I know that sounds like maybe a dig, but no, like I listen to the NPR channel, so no, it's good stuff. And then, thank you to Martin A., Martin Drew, Driftless Books, of course, thank you Daniel Cowan, aka Alacrities, aka 6 Days Theater. You guys go check out 6 Days Theater's one singular video. It's an introduction to Oxfordianism. This dude's one of the most well-read people out there. He's open-minded, he's wonderful at discussing and bringing up new topics and ideas and trying to integrate them with the ideas that you bring forward. So check out that stuff. That said, tonight is a big sort of sequel or conclusion, as I've already kind of put in the comment board here, to a lot of our videos. Like, if you check out our channel board, you can go ahead and flash that on the screen, Brady, if you want.
Oh, which one do you want me to flash?
Just our our page, and then maybe go to our most popular. And so, if you look at our most popular, it's definitely by far the Henslowe Diary, and then Mystery of Handy, and then DeVere, Friend or Foe of Shakespeare.
Many of our videos have kind of been response or continuations of these first two. We're always like, well, if you remember the Henslowe video, or if you remember our Handy video, we kind of always use those as touchstones. I
want to circle back to a lot of those ideas, going to go into detail on a lot of it to try and synthesize 3 different theories, and actually our Nash Decker video as well. It's a big sequel to that as well, because I want to synthesize John Stotsenberg's theories from 1904. I want to synthesize Donna Murphy, all her stuff from 2013-ish, and then I want to synthesize that with maybe some of what Bob Proctor and other Oxfordians are saying, which is to say that our DeVere hand in Shakespeare is the Nash hand. It is not every word in Shakespeare. It is not every hand in Shakespeare, or every voice in Shakespeare. It is the Nash Decker voice. Spoiler alert. That is the conclusion of this video. That said, we're going to go through it pretty painstakingly in detail. I'm going to try and keep myself to a 3-minute timer per slide, if not, less, so that we can keep this under 4 hours or something, like our John D video. But
before the camera dies,
it's going to die 2 or 3 times, but we're going to get through this.
We will have the slides to pitch also the Patreon. We will put all the slides up on as files if you want to go through it, so you don't have to click through the video. Whatever you'd like.
If I can rock it through this, I have another presentation going over Passionate Pilgrim, which I don't think I've ever seen anybody really talk about these 2 poems in particular. Didn't do too much digging on it, and so maybe people have, but I have my own pitch for 2 of the poems in the Passionate Pilgrim collection, which is a collection of 20 poems, attributed all to Shakespeare, although even everybody agrees, whether you're a Oxfordian or a Stratfordian mainstream scholar, that not all of them are Shakespeare. Mainstream scholars say that only 5 of the 20 are Shakespeare, and that a few are other writers that we can spot because it was reprinted as them and some other thing. And then the rest are unknown because they weren't ever, attributed or reprinted or etc. And there's just 2 of the unknown poems that I think I can spot pretty quickly, and it's kind of fun. So if we can get to that, that'd be cool. But tonight, I really want to dig into some of the things that we've been talking about for basically a year now. Channel's been around for over a year, and thank you guys for sticking around. Thank you guys for getting us up to 365 subscribers. That's that's every day of the year I can give a shout out to a subscriber, and it's a different subscriber. That's awesome. That said, we would love to get bigger and bigger, not for any sort of monetary or fame reasons, but so that these ideas, can get distributed, disseminated. Maybe we got to do some more work on our end to maybe come up with some different kind of content, or
maybe we get some ask for consulting a movie or a film or something like that. Be totally down, just pitching that out there.
Yeah. We get.
If anyone's got some money to throw around,
honestly, dude, we only have 2 Shakespeare movies. We got Shakespeare in Love, which is the Stratfordian take. We got Anonymous, which is the Oxfordian take. Can we get some Bacon movie? I'll write you a script. I'm a creative writing major. Let me do it. That said, guys, apologize to any of our Baconian fans out there, specifically Soltron, Evie. Trying to think of any others off the top of my head that are big Baconians. But sorry guys, I still haven't done enough of that research. I'm still so much dug into Oxford and Sydney since they're sort of the elder ones in this situation. Okay, shout out Thomas, thank you, sir. We're gonna keep grinding, man. So I guess that said, let's get to the grind. Let's get to some of this.
We're doing something, or at least approaching something that this person has been pitched to us a lot. I think Driftless Books, maybe when he first joined the Discord, this was one person that he recommended, and we've definitely seen it up before. Yes. He's been interviewed by the Blue Board Tavern as well.
Yeah.
So he's kind of made the rounds now, but interesting theory. But we're kind of finally coming around to sort of doing like what we did with Strip Matter.
I want to
or whatever.
At least acknowledge that I'm aware of the theory, that maybe I haven't done enough reading on it, because to be fair, I have not read his full book or books. I can't afford to go buy them, but I have perused every single bit of his free material, whether that's online lectures, or interviews, or some of the free material that he leaves on his website, which is, it's pretty cool that he gives you that. So this is Bob Prechter's website. Go check it out. Oxford's Voices. I'm pretty critical in today's presentation, but honestly, this guy has done an insane amount of digging. I can't tell you how much digging he's done, and he has pieced together a lot of it really well, especially the early stuff. If we're talking 1560s, 70s, 80s, what he has done with Oxford, and even into the 90s, specifically with the Nash and Green stuff, he's connected it pretty closely to Oxford, if not pinpointed that, yes, this is Oxford itself, which I think he has, at least with Nash. I got to see more on the Green stuff, because there's not as much free material on the Green stuff as there is the Nash stuff. That said, I think that Bob Prechter's big failure... okay, shout out. Alex was what brought me and Brady into this ourselves, but way back, or especially me, way back, 5-10 years ago, probably 10 years ago at this point. Phoebe Veer, she's really great at disseminating this, getting it to a ground level, and making this stuff accessible and fun for people at a younger age. So shout out to Phoebe Veer, aka Phoebe Neer. That said, Bob Proctor, his big pitch. Let me go ahead and just sum up his big pitch before we get into my whole presentation. Bob Proctor's big pitch is that, yes, Oxford is Shakespeare, of course, like most Oxfordians. But most Oxfordians, historically at least, have aligned with J. Thomas Loney, where they say, yes, Oxford is Shakespeare, and Oxford is maybe contributing to some of these other writers, but Oxford is really only using the pen name Shakespeare. The rest of these are actually who historically we have said they are, like Thomas Nash or Robert Greene. Robert Greene is actually some guy named Robert Greene, and he's actually writing most of that stuff, and maybe Oxford's helping him, and he's stealing from Oxford, and etc. Like, that's maybe where strip matter is. Maybe Alex Waugh, I think, sort of, to be fair, kind of straddles the fence on that. Some days he wants to say, yes, it's Oxford. Some days he wants to say no, or rather, he kind of believes the same sort of idea, that he does think that there's Oxford's voices, but he doesn't give as many voices to Oxford as, say, Bob Proctor does, where Bob Proctor, as we'll see, he gives something like 30 names to Oxford, like a lot of names. And I don't think he's wrong, I just think he's incomplete in a lot of ways. Because I think a lot of the things he's saying are Oxford are also other people. And if they're being pinpointed as Oxford, yes, maybe he is the main hand or contributor or disseminator or financier behind some of these things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he's every pen in here, because we can probably find other people in here, like, I don't know, Philip Sidney, Francis Bacon, Mary Sidney, Henry Neville, the people that we've all been saying could be Shakespeare. And so my whole thing today isn't to say, Oxford's not Shakespeare. I know a lot of people want me to want to pinpoint me or Brady as anti-Oxfordian. We're not. We're group theorists. We've been group theorists the whole time, and we think that looking at Philip Sidney may help collectively start to understand this group and tie this group together. But I don't even think that Philip Sidney is necessarily the main hand in Shakespeare. Maybe he's my favorite hand, and honestly, I don't even know that he's my favorite hand. I just think he's a hand in Shakespeare, and I think he's a very good hand in Shakespeare. And to heck with qualitative judgments and, value judgments like that for today, because at some point, guys, go read all these people. Thomas Decker, Chris Marlowe, Thomas Haywood, Robert Greene, Henry Chettle, John Lilly, Michael Drayton, John Webster, just go read any. They're all really, really good.
Yeah, they all have their little pros that they can offer, their little nuggets. And besides, like we've also pointed out with the red herring video, that metaphor, that sort of trope or whatever of the red herring, the false lead, comes from a Thomas Nash pamphlet. But as we sort of showed you, there's like a weird, bizarre, like actual unfolding like of a red herring like going on with that at the same time. Right. So it's not just like him coining the term. It's like we're sort of pitching, the Thomas Nash identity has a lot of red herring stuff and misleading going on,
I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to shout this out one off real quick, because you'll see me refer to it today a lot. That I'm struggling right now with Marston, John Marston, who's a playwright and, pamphleteer kind of dude that pops up around 1598, 1599, right after Thomas Nash disappears. And while a lot of today is going to be about Nash connecting to Decker, I want to ask if maybe Marston is another voice of the Decker thing, or if Marston is a combination of the voices of Webster and Decker together to reenact the Nash stuff, because I don't think a lot of people have connected Marston to Nash. Yes, we are familiar with Flamenco.
Yeah, dude, you're singing you're talking my tune.
That's Brady's real into alternate history, fringe topics, conspiracy topics, stuff like that. So yes, absolutely. Prechter says tons of names, 150 names apparently. Many are one-off. De Vere gets this one guy to publish his poem and his stuff one time, and then gets another guy to publish one little thing one time. which totally buy so much of what Prechter's saying for the early years.
Yeah, we like the front man idea too, you know?
Yeah. What I majorly am going to struggle with is Prechter's sort of analysis or lack of analysis on the Henslowe Diary era and what he says about the Henslowe Diary in relationship to Edward de Vere. A lot of the stuff he says, it just seems like he has not looked at it wholly or fully or completely and is kind of out of his element when he's talking about these Henslowe writers. And since I've been kind of keen into a lot of these Henslowe writers and keen into people that have pushed the Henslowe writers, I want to go ahead and just say, hey guys, wait a second. Prechter's missing something. Okay. Alright, you can go ahead and pull up my slides if you want to.
Alright, here we go, folks. And like I said, yeah, we'll have all this on the Patreon for downloadable files if you want his, how many pages? 25 plus? 26 pages or something?
Yeah, something like that.
Alright, here we go.
Okay, beyond Prechter, evolving the Oxfordian theory beyond a solo candidate. So, yeah, if we're going to call an Oxfordian theory, isn't it just supposed to be Oxford? I misspelled Oxfordian, that's great. The Oxfordian theory. That's good. The point being that, yes, we can still call it an Oxfordian theory if we think he is a main hand or the central sort of managing figure. And I'm not necessarily going to pitch that that is or isn't the case. I just want to show us that we can sort of have a group theory that integrates these ideas of Oxford running a scriptorum, but it can have other people being pen names, contributing, collaborating, and I don't think we need to be so darn averse to this idea of collaboration, which I will show as sort of the crux of a lot of Prechter's argument revolving around the Henslowe era, and that's sort of an assumption, and the evidence points elsewise. Okay. Anything with Shakespeare in the Bible? We've mentioned the Psalms a lot, but not particularly.
What would be interesting is of note, though, is we've made, maybe in that first episode, we talk about the publications of them at the same time. And if we go back to my idea of, like, it's a social cohesion project, essentially, like, we're getting all this, and you said it really well, that, yeah, the Bible, you got your sacred text, and then Shakespeare and the like is your profane text, you know?
Right.
But yeah, it's a sort of like fallback identity or sort of ground level for creating this like would-be now burgeoning, you know,
nation or empire.
The English empire is like on the way, right? And lo and behold, from these are some of the seeds that kind of, you know, and there is a lot of, as we've talked about with the Edmund Spencer stuff and some of the, you know, Leicester Circle stuff, and there is a lot of this national jingoistic sort of pumping up in a lot of these plays and a lot of these poems or whatnot, you know? So that's how we kind of relate it back to some of these overarching geopolitical stuff. And we talked about, you know, new money being coined and being minted at the same time. And how does that play in with, you know, new empires sort of, you know, coalescing and sort of taking
growing
over.
Mercantilism.
Taking out the Danes Law. They're getting rid of that at the same time as they're instituting, like, new sort of maritime laws, blah, 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 blah. So, you know... I think as far as like I kind of straight off the Bible there, we haven't dug into any of that. We have mentioned the 46 Shakespeare thing or whatever, right?
Yeah, Psalm 46 with the Shakespeare code. If you go to Psalm 46 and you count 46 words from the start, you get shake. If you count 46 words from the end, you get spear. The Stratfordian date suggests that Shakespeare was born in 1564. He would be 46 in 1610 when that is printed. That said, I don't know that that's when that would have been written, and so I wonder if that is written at a different date. Could that 46 number align with someone else, say like Philip Sidney, who translated the Psalms? So I don't know. Good question. And we'll have to circle back to that.
Have not dug into that properly, but we've definitely surmised and questioned. But
okay,
not to get careful now. We're in someone has to be like, you're off topic, in the chat.
Yeah.
Get back on it.
Need the taser.
We need like a taser.
I was gonna say spray bottle. Taser. Okay. So today I got 3 people. I got Stotsenberg, John Stotsenberg. He was a judge. He's a big Shakespeare doubter back in the early days. He was a loose Baconian. He said, yeah, Bacon's hand, I can see it some places, and maybe he fixed some of this up, but I don't think that he could have been writing all of it. I don't think he has the time. I don't think I see it all over. And guys, I gotta say, Stotsenberg's like crazy good for this like super early pre-digital era as far as like pulling up parallel passages and having some sort of mental inventory, specifically with Drayton, also with Decker. The other folks he's probably not as well adept on, but like he's clearly like crazy good with Drayton.
And we go back to him all the time. He's definitely a Hall of Fame for Apokalupsis Historia SAC team.
Because like as far as all the group theorists goes, everybody's kind of all saying the same thing, that they see a lot of parallel passages from these writers that we don't see get printed a lot, and maybe it's these writers, but everybody kind of comes at it from a different sort of viewpoint. So T.W. White does it in 1892, about 10 years earlier than Stotsenberg, and he says, it's guys like Samuel Daniel and Bartholomew Griffin and Barnaby Barnes, and it's those guys writing together. But like, notice, are any of them playwrights?
Those are all poet dudes?
Yeah, those are all poets. Those are all sonneteers, and so it's like, he's clearly some guy that's focused on the sonnets, and so he's coming at it that, hey, these sonnets look like they're pieced together by these different sonneteers, which kind of mirrors what H.T.S. Forrest says later in the 1930s.
We showed some of that stuff, I think, right, with the Daniel stuff kind of popping up and all the Shakespeare stuff, basically.
Yeah.
Right?
It's in one of those History of Shakespeare videos. Yeah. Shakespeare Doubt videos.
Stotsenberg,
Yeah, and so Stotsenberg actually puts it in the sort of Shakespearean heyday that we're supposed to believe is the Shakespearean heyday, which is the 1590s, 1600s. He says, hey, let's look at the Henslowe diary and see if we can find anything from that, and hey, sure enough. That said, Stotsenberg also does something interesting where he kind of treats every text as its own thing. He doesn't go so far as to treat every sonnet as its own thing. He treats the collection of sonnets as a singular piece, and that may be a fault of his. But he says, hey, the sonnets are by one writer. Those long poems, Venus and Adonis and Lucrece, different writer. And then these plays are yet different writers. Maybe that these people all kind of cross-contributed, except, the guy that wrote the sonnets is dead, so he can't cross-contribute too much, but that these people may have cross-contributed, but for the most part, you can break it down like that by looking at the evidence internally. And so it's like, that's super compelling and provocative to me. Maybe he's not absolutely right on every spot, but it's going to be more precise if you quit taking it on face value that this canon is actually a canon. Who said that all these plays and all these poems are by the same person other than them getting printed as such? But if they're printed as such, why don't we just say they're freaking William Stratford Shakespeare, the Dingleberry from why not just say that? If we're going to doubt that, let's go ahead and be fully, thorough with our doubts and go from the ground up and say, hey, those title pages don't really mean anything. And then we can maybe go back after we've pinpointed what we've pinpointed and try and explain the title pages. Let's maybe try and do that instead of taking it on face value that every word is all written by one person, say Edward de Vere or Francis Bacon. It's probably not all by one person, guys. And we're going to show that today. Okay, so...
Stotsenberg, awesome. We're going to use Murphy's, and this is going back to the Decker Nash video / Odin video, and then, of course, Prechter's voices. And you want to move on down?
Yeah. Okay. So, John Stotsenberg's impartial study of the Shakespeare title is still the best piece using internal evidence from this early period that I've come across. There's other guys that are doing some cool, neat things and pointing out some fun facts, but for the early days, they're not that adept with the internal evidence stuff because you can't be. You don't have computers. So clearly he did crazy amounts of work and is clearly pretty adept with his mental inventory anyway. So it must have been and probably still is difficult for people to internalize because how many different claims he's making. So one, he's claiming that the sonnets are predominantly or wholly by Philip Sidney, which got me thinking about things in a different way. It's pretty interesting, but we're not going to go into that today. Then he claims the long poems are by Francis Bacon, which super interesting. Would love to go into that, but we're not going to go into that today. We're going to look at claim 3. He claims most of the plays are actually written by the Henslowe crew, which if you're not familiar with the Henslowe, Philip Henslowe is an impresario of theater, which means he's a manager, ownerish type dude. He runs the theater and helps run the acting companies and the whole playwriting scene for his theater, the Rose Theater, but before the Rose Theater, he does it at other theaters, and he helps manage several acting companies, but as his career goes on into the 90s, it becomes pretty much about the Admiral's men who play at the Rose Theater exclusively, and the idea is that when it starts out, he's managing Pembroke's men, he's managing Sussex men, he's managing
I did not know that.
Strange's men, but then all those kind of disband and reformulate after 93, and they reformulate into two groups, and Chamberlain's men maybe doesn't pop up even until 94, 95, but you get Admiral's men and Lord Chamberlain's men. The idea is that Lord Chamberlain's men plays elsewhere, and maybe even shares the Rose for a little bit until they get the Globe. But then from there, they're two completely different competing companies, and they shouldn't share playwrights or anything, and that's sort of the idea. But Henslowe, he has his diary, and it kind of tells us a bunch of stuff about all this, and that's why I partly can say and know all these things, is it's in the diary. And it's in the diary, there's two sections, basically, and unfortunately it's all scattered and not cleanly put together, but if you reorganized it, you could put it into two sections or three sections. You got one section, the miscellany, that's not really about theater, and then you get the section where he actually lists people's names and says the payments, whether it's for writing the play or for going to get costumes or for getting some sort of contract payment, and that's all from 1597 to 1602. And then he has an earlier section that's 1591 to 1595 or 6, and that is him just taking the box office counts of all the plays that are showing and writing the dates that all the plays that are showing. And unfortunately, he doesn't do both things for both eras, and that's interesting, but that said, some of this diary was destroyed. Some lady was making pies, and she was putting the thing on top of the pies. She also did this with some other plays, too. But the pies, she was using them as the lining for the parchment paper. But that said, going back to the Henslowe diary, we got those two sections. None of them ever mention Shakespeare. None of them ever mention a bunch of other names, but the names that are mentioned are all from 1597 to 1602. And the most popular playwrights that he seems to go to are some of the ones that we still get printed and are really good playwrights. Henry Chettle, Thomas Heywood, Thomas Decker, Michael Drayton, Thomas Middleton, John Webster, Anthony Munday, Henry Porter, Ben Jonson. And so there's other guys, Chapman, Marston. Stotsenberg here is saying, look, guys, a bunch of these Henslowe names, those are actually together writing. When they get written together, some of those plays get printed and maybe reworked a little bit and then printed as Shakespeare. And to a lot of people that may sound crazy. It's like, no, we've done all this Oxford Bacon stuff. We don't need to go look in the Henslowe diary, but no, go look in the Henslowe diary and you're going to find out what he's saying is absolutely correct. Now, maybe from there we need to ask, are all these people we say they are? That's a whole nother can of worms that we'll get to towards the end of this video. But, at some point, what he's saying is correct. That said, to be fair, I have several issues with his analysis. He openly admits that he ignores Sidney and Marlowe when looking through the plays because they're supposed to be dead. And also because those plays are supposed to be written after those years, which some of those years are before 93, so, I don't know why he doesn't look for Marlowe in some of the plays. But, a lot of Oxfordians have said, look, these plays may have originally been written way earlier and have been touched up later, or some of them maybe not even touched up, but written as early as the 70s. So, if that's the case, then, maybe let's see if any Sidney pops up. But he doesn't do that. Also, his arguments for Bacon are specifically pretty general and weak, which is, not great. Though they do show that it's probably a different hand than Decker and Drayton whenever he does bring up Bacon with the playwriting. His arguments for Bacon with the long poems are also kind of general and based on kind of anecdotal and circumstantial stuff, so it's not as much internal, which I was a little disappointed about. That said, continuing, similarly, his evidence for Henry Chettle is kind of lacking. He gives you all this Decker and Drayton, but then every time he has a chance to talk about Chettle, he goes off on some tangent or, just kind of gives a weak generalization. Maybe it's because there's not as much Chettle in print as there is Decker and Drayton, but that's not even totally true, so I don't know. He just seems more well-read with Drayton and Decker. Similarly, his evidence for other auxiliary hands like Johnson seems to be mostly external, relying on just a few Henslowe entries. There's a typo there. Maybe relatedly, he goes too wide with analysis and not deep enough. So maybe if he, instead of trying to point out all these different things, just focused only on, Sidney doing the sonnets, or just focused only on Decker and Drayton doing a handful of plays. But no, he tries to point out all these different people. He goes over 20 plays. It's like a 600-page book. I've read it 10 times at this point, but it's too much to try and do a super thorough analysis. That said, he kind of says this much. He's like, look, this is supposed to be opening the doors for other people to go do studies, and unfortunately, not a single person
trying to cast a wide net. Yeah. It's like, pick one of my leads, Sidney in the sonnets. You can have Henslowe in the plays, and yeah.
And nobody other than Brady and I think, have picked up Stotsenberg and been like, wow, yeah, we need to go look into this. And maybe it's because Brady and I are crazy.
Well, one, to be fair, our most popular video is the Henslowe video. Or the Henslowe is the Henslowe diary, and because when you first kind of brought that topic to me, I was like, oh my god, this is more, this is pretty smoking gun here with some of the stuff in here, this is pretty blatant. And even though later on I'll say you'll show me facts and I'm like, oh, that's super blatant, but the Henslowe diary is a good gateway entry for maybe not even just group theory, but for SAQ in general,
And so it's not pre-Oxford, Henslowe diary would be maybe post-Oxford. It's not pre-Oxford. It's concurrent with Oxford. Similarly, his evidence for other auxiliary hands... Oh, sorry, next one. I wonder if a minute amount of Decker evidence isn't actually evidence in Marston, but that's negligible for today. I mentioned that earlier. Get more of that with Murphy as well. Okay, we're going to only look at number 3 with Stotts. Stotsenberg is pre-Oxford. Very true. Yes, Stotsenberg is pre-Oxfordian theory. Thank you, Vet Stadium. Stotsenberg, writing in 1904, is going to be before Loney from 1923, 1924. Okay, so let's see. He states that the main hands are Decker and Drayton, both Henslowe playwrights. Mainstream scholars agree that Decker seems to write for both admirals and Lord Chamberlains, but they rarely, if ever, ascribe Drayton as a Lord Chamberlain's men playwright. Just want to point that out. If we're saying all these Lord Chamberlain's Men plays are Decker and Drayton, then we need to maybe relook at Drayton being a writer for Lord Chamberlain's Men, and that can do with the dating, because they pop in and out of the diary. Like, they'll be there for 3 months straight, and then a writer won't be there for a few months, and then they're there again. So it's like, were they off writing for another theater? That's sort of surmised with Decker and Johnson and Middleton, some of these other folks, Haywood. Okay, so the plays that he covers, brief side note. I've about had it with Mears. Little of his playwright lists make any sense. So yeah, I just want to point out, guys, like Francis Mears in 1598 lists that Ben Jonson is one of the best tragedians in English history. Ben Jonson isn't supposed to have started writing plays till 1597, the year before, and he only writes 2 or 3 comedies in that span. So why are we listing him as the best tragedian? He does end up writing one pretty decent tragedy in Sejanus, and he is maybe supposed to have fixed up Kid's tragedy, but both of those are supposed to be after 1598. So does Francis Mears have a time machine, or like, even then, you put Johnson in the comedy list. He's not in the comedy list. Ben Jonson is maybe arguably or unarguably the best comedy writer of the era. Why is he not in the comedy list? It's weird. I know Waugh and Strip Matter have done their 17 stuff to show Oxford lines up with Shakespeare, but none of that answers Johnson being listed as a tragedian. That's weird. Similarly, Chapman's listed as both. Chapman's also supposed to have just started writing in 96, and he had only written comedies. All of his tragedies are like Hamlet era and after. So like, what is going on? What is happening? How is Mears listing, like, and furthermore, like, why is he listing Chapman as both? There's plenty of guys that he could list as both that are just as good as Chapman. Why prop up Chapman as the equal of Shakespeare? That's weird. And then, same thing with Drayton. Drayton's just supposed to have started writing as a Henslowe writer. Or maybe we take all this, that all these guys have been writing for a long time, but if we do that, we have to rework our understanding of mainstream history. And scholars have tried to do that, but why don't we get any of their names ever before this era? Why not? Well, today's stuff might go over some of that today. Okay, so the play Stotsenberg covers Troilus and Cressida, Taming of the Shrew, Measure for Measure, which he lists is, that's a typo. It's not Decker or Drayton. Measure for Measure is a Chettle and Haywood play is what he says, but then he says that it doesn't look like Chettle or Haywood, but it also doesn't look like Decker or Drayton, and I have some words on that. Titus, Pericles, Richard II, Caesar, the Henry VI plays, Richard III, King John, Henry IV plays, Falstaff plays, and I didn't include Merry Wives, but he does that too. Comedy of Errors, Hamlet, Winter's Tale, Cymbeline. Like I said, I wish that he would have maybe focused it a little more and gone deeper with just a few, and then tried to make a follow-up with a few more, and make a follow-up with a few more, but he tries to cover all the ground he can, and he does. Okay, yeah, next. We're not going to look through every play mentioned. We're only going to look through a few of these. I do like that he treats each text as its own authorship question, with no assumptions. That said, when he mentions Edward III, when he is discussing Bacon and the long poems, he fails to realize there are lines from the sonnets in Edward III, so if that's the case, then that's, for him, I guess, Bacon stealing lines from Sidney. So, not sure what to say about that, but that's okay. It was before computers, and not enough people responded to him to, get that discussion going. Each play's analysis varies in depth and quality, so large grain of salt, but Stott says as much himself. Sometimes all he gives is external evidence. Sometimes the internal is rather generic or not totally accurate. He gives many lines of Johnson's character Crispinius to Decker, though assuredly Crispinius represents Marston. That said, that's one reason why I want to say is Marston and Decker both a continuation of Nash, and Marston's just where Nash gets to be full-on Nash because it's in a private theater, not in a public theater. But some of his spots are quite astonishing. I should have called this Stott Spots. Okay, Troilus and Cressida. Johnson's not barely readable. Some of his stuff's barely readable, but dude, The Alchemist is fantastic. Volponi's fantastic. What are you talking about?
Janus too, right?
Yeah, Janus is dope too. Yeah, come off it. Henslowe's diary shows that Thomas Dekker and Henry Chettle in the spring of 1599 wrote the play Troilus and Cressida. Words used only once in the play, also used by Dekker, are blackamoor, brainless, inveigled, lifter, mealy, plaguey, unclasp, waftage, winching. So these are rare words. Okay. Interesting. I could have put more in Troilus and Cressida, but I wanted to keep it short and sweet. Just want to point out that, like, the exact title is already in the Henslowe diary. It's coming just a few years before the Shakespeare version is supposed to come out. Even if Oxfordians want to say it's a way earlier version, then what is this Dekker-Chettle version? It's just some weird, crappy spinoff. Well, the thing is, we don't know. That play doesn't exist anymore. It's lost to time.
Corner book, yeah.
Yeah, mainstream scholars say it was a different play based on what somebody says anecdotally about another play about Troy, but that itself doesn't spot that that's the Dekker-Chettle play, and they're assuming that is talking about the Dekker-Chettle play. They don't know. Honestly, Folger's making that up. So, for me, like, parsimoniously, this is probably the same play. This is probably an earlier version that's not been reworked for the Chamberlain's Men for the new showing in 1603. But yes, it's originally going to be a Dekker and Chettle play, which itself is probably revising a way earlier play from the 70s, which I think Oxfordians have done a good job to show. Okay, moving on, Taming the Shrew. I'm paraphrasing, but he says, Dekker may have revised Taming of a Shrew, which is different from Taming of the Shrew. Taming of a Shrew, which we do have a copy of, it's like a crappy version of Taming of the Shrew. And people have argued whether that was just a bad bootleg or whether it was an early version or some kind of other thing. And I think most people have realized it's clearly an early version. But people argue whether that early version is Shakespeare's or not. And so maybe Shakespeare took it and reworked it into the thing that it is, and he reworked it enough to give it to him. But that maybe the early version could be Marlowe, since it's got whole paragraphs that are directly lifted from Marlowe. And of course, you Marlovians out there, shout out, yes, there is a continuum. But I think Donna Murphy is going to explain a lot of that for us. So we get several entries in Henslowe's diary occurring in the summer of 1602 in which Dekker is paid a handsome amount to write or revise a play called Medicine for a Cursed Wife. And why doesn't he call it Taming of a Shrew? Henslowe doesn't ever call the same thing twice. He refers to anything just how he can remember it, apparently. And so, like, Troilus and Cressida. Sometimes he calls it Troilus. Sometimes he calls it Troilus and Cressida. Sometimes he calls it Agamemnon. Sometimes he calls it the Troy play. Like, so with Taming of a Shrew, Medicine for a Cursed Wife, yeah, it's about a girl that nobody wants to marry because she sucks, and so they got to get this guy that sucks even more to, like, put her into her place. And yeah, Medicine for a Cursed Wife. There you go. And so it's interesting because we don't still have Medicine for a Cursed Wife, but Henslowe pays a lot of money for it. He pays Dekker and Dekker only 90 shillings, which was like, 20 or 30 more shillings than whole collaborations were getting. And so it's like, why is he getting this much? Maybe it's because he's having to rework an entire whole play, because he has to take out paragraphs that people are spotting as Marlowe, and to me that makes sense because it reads the most like a Dekker comedy of any of the Shakespeare comedies. And he's here saying, boom, it's mostly a Dekker thing. Which, guys, spoiler, in this video, we're pitching that Oxford's Dekker. So, saying Taming of the Shrew's, like, almost wholly Oxford. Maybe Bacon or somebody else revises it later before the folio, but Stotts is saying it's pretty much all a Decker play. And John Payne Collier himself, the master forger, thought that this was actually a version of Taming. He didn't say that this was the Taming of the Shrew, but he said that Decker could be also reworking it in the same way that Shakespeare's reworking it or something like that. Okay. The ejaculations, expressions, phrases are such as Decker habitually used, and they are not found in the writings of other dramatists of the time. Oh, this woodcock, tush, tush, a meacock wretch, here's no knavery, lead apes in hell. Nay, I have ta'en you napping. Of his signs and tokens, pictures have ears, where be these knaves? Words used only once in the play and also used by Decker are Connie catched. That's a big one for Oxfordians. They see Connie catched and they're like, that's my boy. That's my boy. He wrote that. Robert Greene, one of his last pamphlets is The Art of Connie Catching or something like that. And you Oxfordians come shout it out. So if Decker's using that word, and that's sort of a rare word, maybe. Okay. Logger-headed, o'er-reach, metaphysics, mother-wit, all of these can be found in Fortunatus, Satyromastix, The Shoemaker's Holiday, The Honest Whore. Those are Decker plays. They're collaborations with other people, but they're surely Decker plays. Those are the Decker plays. Nobody really argues about those. Okay. Titus. Here, you can take it over, Brady.
Attributed to Drayton and Decker as hastily written. In Titus, there are 17 words not used in the other Shakespeare plays used in this play. Big bone, bubbling, coitus, dreary, effectually, erst, execrable, fear, hymnus, ignominy, livingly, mesh, metamorphosis, misbelieving, seethus, sprawl, sumptuously, waxing, and there are 8 other words used only in the other plays used in this play: affy, checkered, circling, dissembled, espied, ravisher, reedified, reproachable, ruinate. All of these words are Draytonian words found in Queen Margaret, Brandon to Mary, Idea, Cynthia's Quest, Polybian, Harmony of the Church, and Baron's Wars.
Interesting. So he's going in here and guys, Drayton is not on Prechter's list, which we'll show. Drayton does seem to be a different writer than Decker. It would be weird for Henslowe to be putting the two different names, writing together, writing separately, if they both represent the same person pen name-wise. That's a weird thing to do. And both of them are pretty prolific, too. And if they're also doing the stuff of Shakespeare on top of their stuff, like, how can one person be doing all of this on top of all the other stuff Prechter's doing? And we'll get into that. But just today's not really supposed to be about Drayton. It's supposed to be about Decker. But I want to show Drayton is in here as well, just so people aren't like, okay, well then Decker's just another voice of Oxford and he's the one writing Shakespeare. Okay. So in Titus, O worthy Goth, this is the incarnate devil. And Drayton's the owl. And makes a saint of an incarnate devil. Okay, we get that incarnate devil. In Titus, we crave a parley. In Drayton's Nymphidia, a parley now we crave. Okay, same phrase, reworded. Titus, 1,000 hissing snakes. Drayton's Nymphidia, now by the hissing of snakes. Titus, a joyful, dismal, black, and sorrowful issue. Drayton's Lady Jane Dudley, before the black and dismal days begin. Drayton's Isabella to Richard II, black, dismal, fatal, inauspicious.
Wait, Dudley as in Robert Dudley?
Yep. So that was his brother's wife.
There's a play that's called Lady Jane Dudley?
That's a poem.
Oh, okay.
But there is a play, which is incidentally a Decker and Webster play. And it's called Sir Thomas Wyatt, actually, because it's about Sir Thomas Wyatt, who is... And it's... What we get's a bastardization, like a bootleg probably, and it's probably a merging of two plays that it's Lady Jane Part 1 and Part 2, but it gets called Sir Thomas Wyatt because it's about the rebellions against Queen Mary. Sorry. Richard II, attributed to Drayton in another hand. which he says is not Decker. Aimed at your highness, no inveterate malice. Drayton's Baron Wars. Her too deep and settled inveterate malice.
Oh, damn. Yeah.
William Shakespeare's Richard II. How high a pitch his resolution soars. Drayton's Eclogue. To soar beyond the usual pitch of men. Drayton's Legend of Robert, Duke of Normandy. To that high pitch has raised his desire. Richard II. Deep malice makes too deep incisions. Drayton's Nymphidia. First make incision on each mastering vein. Richard II. Finds brotherhood in thee no sharper spur. That's a typo. Thee, not the.
Sharper. Oh, never mind.
And then Drayton's Piers Gaveston, which proves sharp spurs to my untamed desire. So we get that sharp spur. Richard II. In wholesome counsel and unstayed youth. Drayton's dedication to Queen Isabella. Imperfections of heedless and unstayed youth. Drayton's heroical epistles. Wholesome counsel too. Richard II. For heaven's sake, speak comfortable words. Drayton's Legend of Robert, Duke of Normandy. Giving the soldiers comfortable words. And that's a weird phrase. It should be comforting words. Comfortable words seems like particularly idiosyncratic to me. And just to be fair, like, he lists another 10 parallels of the same quality just for this play alone. Like, his Henry VI stuff, which I don't list here, has like 5 pages of Drayton parallels. It's crazy. And remember, Drayton's the historical poetry writer. And it's probably a very similar thing as to what we were showing with the Samuel Daniel Richard II stuff in our Samuel Daniel video. The Shakespeare plays seem to draw majorly from the big-time historical poetry of the time. Now, mainstream scholars may argue, oh, he's just drawing from them or blah, blah, blah. That said, then that's not fair.
That's not if Shakespeare fair. Is just a tapestry of stolen lines from tons and tons of other authors. This is like the ship of Theseus Shakespeare or something. It's like if replaced he's nothing but an amalgamation of like a bunch of other people. It's like
absolutely he's this,
it's like he never blotted a line because he just stole all the lines.
Monstrosity, seriously, okay. So. Do want to point out that that Drayton probably shows that we have more than one author. Drayton is indeed different from Decker. Drayton shows a proclivity for Warwickshireisms, which means, phrases from the place of Warwickshire, which is where Shakespeare's supposed to be from. Well, Michael Drayton is also from Warwickshire, apparently. Drayton also leans heavily towards the historical. Drayton's a little more somber and serious than Decker in mood and tone as well. He can be funny, and he can be dark, and he can be emotional, but it's different. And even Decker seems to, I don't know, their linguistic style is different. Had we more time, perhaps another video, we could look at many more parallel passages from Drayton and Decker, and many, many, many more of the plays. To end Stotts, I want to focus on 2 more plays. So yeah, guys, I'm only showing a few of the plays, but he does this for like all those plays listed. Okay. Scroll up just a little bit. Okay. Single words used only once in Richard III that are also in plays by Decker are cacodemon, intelligence, pewfellow, prodigality, rooting. There are 2 words used in this play, also used by Decker, which especially attracted my attention. Keycold and pays, or peas. I cannot find this word in the writings of any other contemporary. That's what he says of Keycold. Poor Keycold figure of a holy king. And then also in Rape of Lucrece. And then in Keycold Lucrece's Bleeding Stream. It's only used elsewhere in Satyromastics. For fear your wise brains take Keycold. Richard III. Lest leaden slumbers pace me down tomorrow. Decker's Fortunatus. No, 'tis more light than any hat beside. Your hand shall pace it. And so they're both using the word pace to mean way down. No other writer seems to be using that word either. At least no other dramatic writer. Okay. Hamlet. attributed to Decker, Drayton, and a third revising hand. So Stotts does well to remind us that the quarto Hamlet and the folio Hamlet has some differences, and that for the most part the folio version is much better and more polished. Because of this, he thinks Bacon reworks the play for print or later showings. But the bigger point that I want to make, and I probably should have put it on here, is the actual original soliloquy. It's way simpler. It's not as beautiful. It's the to be or not to be speech.
Is that line in there?
Go ahead, pull up the quarto to be or not to be speech. Probably should have told you to pull that up earlier.
We're doing it live, folks. That's because, obviously, if we're talking, and that would be really interesting to know, because I really like trying to figure out who coined some of the best, Shakespeare aphorisms and quips or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And
you're gonna
best
see
Shakespeare memes.
It's a process. This is like a 50-year process or something, because it's originally used in Thomas North's Prince of Dial, which is all the way back from like 1550 something. Which is, it's too early to be Oxford or Sydney or any of the guys we want to say.
Yeah, that's great. To be or to not to be. There's the point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I wish I could.
Yeah.
This one?
Click that.
I just want it.
Did it open it?
Is that gonna be it right here, maybe? Oh no, this.
Yeah, that's the actual original. Did it open up in another tab?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dang it.
You go to the other tab?
Which one? That is. Oh, that was it.
Oh, that was it.
Yeah, I clicked it.
Okay. Try. Oh, there we go.
Oh, here we go. To be or to not to be. There's the point. To die, to sleep, is that all? All. No, to sleep, to dream, marry, there it goes. For in that dream of death when we awake, and born before an everlasting judge, from whence no passenger ever returned, the undiscovered country, at whose sight the happy smile and the accursed damned anon.
Yeah, that's not the Hamlet speech that you want it to be.
To be or to not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles, and by opposing end them to die to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. Oh, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished to die to sleep. Yeah, it's definitely way different.
Yeah, and
but to be or to not to be, I like how that's definitely the line that seems to resonate and stick,
And that's the line that's stolen from Prince of Dial.
Stolen from what?
So go ahead, Google Google to be or not to be Prince of Dial.
Prince of Dial.
Yeah.
Okay, and who's this by?
This is Thomas North.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Prince of Dial, like
2 L's. Yep.
Is this it? No.
Yeah, it's gonna be somewhere on his website.
Okay, but yeah, it's a Sir Thomas North thing then.
Yeah.
Is Des McCarthy like with us?
Yeah, he's still alive. Yeah, he's super active right now.
Oh, what is this? There's another JSTOR rabbit hole. But anyway, we don't want to go down this. I think we'll be down here forever.
That said,
yeah. As the dial hand tells o'er, the case for Decker, not Shakespeare, as the author, by Helen Hackett. Have you seen this one before?
Interesting.
This is nice because I'll tell you why. Because this tracks with the Decker. If Decker is heavily involved with the Hamlet thing, that tracks with the Nash concept, of course, and the connection between the ash tree and the Norse Saxon stuff, and literally Saxo Grammaticus is a source text for Hamlet. I like how that all does seem to work. It checks out. And once again, if Daniel Cowan's listen, the whole concept of if Oxford is also Nash and Decker, it tracks with the World Tree Yggdrasil emblem thing he had at whatever one of those jousting tournament play masks things or whatever. So interesting.
Alright, I'm gonna find this.
You won't find it. We'll look for it later. We don't want to get too off topic here.
Yeah, sorry.
We got plenty of. We're like a third into this.
Yeah. Okay. So the original soliloquy, much in the style of Decker. Hamlet. To be contracted on one brow of woe. Patient Gristle. On these you postures a contracted brow. Shakespeare's Hamlet. For a peril oft proclaims the man. Decker's Fortunatus. For a peril is but the shadow of a man. And it's interesting that one is an ironical take. For a peril is but the shadow of a man. That's the ironical take. A peril doesn't show what a man actually is. But in Hamlet, it says for a peril proclaims the man. It actually is. But that's because Polonius is saying it. And Polonius is a freaking old dingleberry. And so, it's the same use. Hamlet, that thou dead corpse again in complete steel. Complete steel? Decker Satyromastics. First to arm our wits with complete steel of judgment. Complete steel. Hamlet, and you yourself shall keep the key of it. Northward ho. And yourself shall keep the key of it. Guys,
yeah.
Like, why steal that phrase?
Yeah.
I get maybe, and I don't know, even complete steel, that's a weird one. It's not particularly great. I am pigeon-livered and lack gall. Sure, he's a pigeon, for he has no gall. So there we go. Gall and pigeon being
it's like Shakespeare, you're so wholly unoriginal that you couldn't do this. It's like, oh, well, what can you say? Oh, I'll just borrow this Decker little quip here again.
Yeah.
All right, next page.
Or vice versa, either way.
Next page. I guess I could use another Decker one. The whole time.
Get some Drayton in there. Yeah. Get some Drayton. You're not using enough Drayton. Dude, all I've been using is Drayton.
Daniel's like, have you stolen my stuff yet? Yeah, dude, this is crazy.
Okay. And oops, typo. I got the you yourself shall keep the key of it again. Maybe it's worth saying twice. The following exclamations made in Decker's work, identical to those used in Hamlet, are, by the mass, can you advise me? Excellent well. Let her be round with him. Like fruit unripe. Mass, I cannot tell. Purdy, take heed. Well, God of mercy, and God of mercy's all over Decker. Will you be ruled by me? Zunes. Zunes is also all over Decker. It's particularly used often in Othello. Among the unusual words used in Hamlet, which are also used in Decker's works, are hugger-mugger, jig-maker, overpeering, pocky, quiddits. Quiddits? Like Quidditch?
Yeah.
Not the same.
And sweaty.
And sweaty. Apparently that's a rare word. We use it now. Okay, so, guys, is that compelling enough? I know that's not much, but,
it should at least point that, whoever this Decker guy is definitely involved.
I could have 3 or 4 times the amount of pages of this. Stotsenberg does this over and over and over. I only picked some of the more compelling ones and only a few because I couldn't make this a 100-page slide because we still got to go over Murphy and Prechter. Okay.
Yeah, for Stratfordian questioning, this should definitely be all right, either Shakespeare is just literally reworking a bunch of other stuff, and then how much can you really say is even originally Shakespeare at that point? And that begins its own sort of, evolution of questions. But then for a group theory, then it's Decker's definitely, if Decker's probably definitely helping out with the Shakespeare stuff, but it's still then who is everyone else, and what plays is he actually a part of? What style can we attribute this author to be more inclined to do, or whatever, for whatever reason, or even if Decker apparently is writing a lot of this proto Shakespeare stuff, and how does it even? Who decides it gets picked up and reworked later on down in what
and,
way, you know?
And, you know, they want to say it's just, you know, subconscious appropriation or something like that. And well, Shakespeare's like a computer at that point because he's just reading everything. And so, that said, let's go ahead and move on to Donna Murphy. She has several works. She has a big book on Shakespeare being a continuation of Marlowe. She also has a work connecting Nash and Decker. Don't have access right now to both of those longer ones, though I've read both of those and have them both in print, but I don't have them online to show you here. But I went mostly on her short essay on Decker and Nash because that's one that y'all can access. That said, if you can, go try and check out her longer stuff because she has way more. Like, once again, like what I was saying previously with Stotsenberg, I'm only showing you a small bit. They have all sorts of stuff in. Okay, so Murphy's a Marlovian in the sense that she thinks Chris Marlowe faked his death and helped pen a great majority of the writings of Shakespeare. However, she is also a disintegrationist or group theorist in that she believes Nash to be a separate presence in both the works of Marlowe and Shakespeare. So she thinks, you know, Marlowe and Nash are teaming up together to write Marlowe, and that they continue and write Shakespeare. I don't know that she thinks that they're the only two, but those are the ones that she's focused on. Part of this theory, or rather a portion of her evidence, relies on the notion that Thomas Dekker is a continuum of Thomas Nash. And it doesn't necessarily rely on it. She doesn't need this because she can show Nash is all over Shakespeare regardless. But she wants to show you that Nash is all over Dekker as well, and oftentimes all over specifically all three. And that once you realize that Dekker pops up right after Nash disappears, all this starts to fall into place. So today's video will look at two of her texts, her shorter essay on Dekker, Nash, and Freemasonry, and a section from her longer book. Donna does a good job of towing the line between more open-minded speculative fringe ideas and a rigorous academic mainstream approach, only displaying aspects of the former to build hypotheses and the latter for evidential arguments and conclusions. So she's very open-minded to get hypotheses, but then she's very rigorous and academic when she wants to come to conclusions. And it's like,
and if
I love that.
If you want to go watch, we pretty much dive through the stuff in the Nash, Dekker, Marlowe, Shakespeare, Odin video or whatever.
Yes,
we kind of dive into it proper, and yeah, they're really fun stuff.
So once again, like Stotts, I have some issues with her analysis. Though she toes the line well between the two in a general sense, she clearly wants to apply this amount of rigor to these speculative ideas, and sometimes it feels lacking. So some of her talk on Freemasonry, it's suggestive, but it's not conclusive. There isn't a whole lot of contemporary documents on Freemasonry or Rosicrucianism, so you have to make a lot of assumptions and try to logic it out, and that's just not as rigorous or academic as, you know, we might want it to be. And so you have to use later 18th century documents and compare it to literary texts from the 16th and 17th century, and that gets a little like, well, those guys just could be stealing the lines from those earlier guys, and it's not necessarily that those 17th century documents are, you know, later versions of earlier ones that these guys are using ideas from. That can get circular. Similarly, though she is clearly well read on Marlowe, Dekker, and Nash, there feels a conspicuous lack of discussion or mentions of folks like Green, Lilly, or Kidd, who should have plenty of internal overlap as well, or later writers like Drayton or Chettle. She does point out when parallel passages of theirs coincide with both Marlowe and Shakespeare, which does happen, but she doesn't actively seek out their presence like she does with Nash and Dekker. So I think had she done the same analysis, had she had the time and energy to do the same analysis with these other names mentioned, she would find the same as Stotts and probably more because she has, you know, computers and she's pretty sharp.
Oops.
Oh, my bad. One more on top.
My bad.
Similarly, she seems unaware of the ideas that Lucas Ern brings to light in his Disintegration Marlowe essay, which we show in one of our recent videos.
Disintegrating Marlowe.
Yeah. We don't know how to attribute Marlowe to Marlowe, and that much of his canon is filled with other hands, that we can't or haven't accurately defined which of the hands that are multiple hands in Marlowe, which of those is the Marlowe one? Which one's the Nash one? Which one's maybe Green? Which one's maybe Kid? Like, which of those is the Marlowe hand? Because, yeah, we got Haywood coming in there. We got Raleigh. The way that they've been ascribed and attributed are based on forgeries. So, yikes. Though these complaints are probably for the most part negligible today, because we're not really worried about pinpointing whether Marlowe is one of the writers in Shakespeare. We're just showing that it's a different writer. And just a little preview. I want to say Proctor kind of straddles the fence on Marlowe, because some of his stuff he says Marlowe is a voice of Oxford, but then in other cases he's like, well, Marlowe's Marlowe. And so I guess he's saying that Oxford pops in and helps write some of the stuff, but then it's like, well, that's collaboration, you fool, which he says Oxford doesn't do. Okay. All right. Let me see. Yeah, you can go to the next one. Murphy begins by noting that Nash is seen for the last time in 1597, when he escaped authorities to Great Yarmouth and then is never seen again. Coincidentally, Decker is documented for the first time in early 98. Okay, so 97. What year comes right after 97? Yeah, okay. All right. We're following here. Okay. Yeah, so Nash disappears right after that. Decker pops up, and as I've also mentioned, Marston pops up. Though many want to say he began writing earlier. There's internal evidence of that. There's zero external evidence. Decker as a name does not exist before the mention in Henslowe Diary. Decker hit the ground running, authoring or co-authoring over 40 plays between 98 and 02, including 15 with Nash's friend Henry Chettle. My note, Decker co-authors the same amount with Drayton, 15. Drayton and Chettle co-author 8 plays together. So there's some kind of working relationship here. If Nash is faking himself as Decker, could Drayton be someone from earlier too? I don't know, because he seems to just kind of pop up too. Murphy spends time showing how little we know about Decker's life. He may be the Thomas Dicker listed with 3 daughters, which, there you go, 3 daughters. How many daughters does De Vere have?
Trace,
yes, there we go. Theme we're getting here, King Lear. Christened at St. Giles Cripplegate in 94, 92, 02, but he never writes about them. Other than that, there's very little to go on than what he himself writes. We know far less of Decker than we do of Shakespeare or Lilly or Marlowe. Yeah, we do. Alexander Grossart, who's supposed to be the great compiler of the 17 or 1800s, he does all this research and puts everybody's works together and just crazy amounts of research. And he does all this research on Decker, and he's like, I got nothing. The guy's a ghost. I have no idea where he comes from. There's a few people with some names that sound like Decker that have the name Thomas that could be him, but the dates don't really match up, and don't know. Okay. Nash comes back in 99 with Linton stuff, which is quickly banned and burned with the Bishop's ban in 99. From there, we never hear from Nash again, which not totally true, but for the most part true. Paul Kosher noted that although other writers wrote about the 7 deadly sins, none did so more brilliantly or copiously than Nash. But Decker devoted a work to the topic, The 7 Deadly Sins of London. Nash had a gift for seeing and depicting the ridiculous in human behavior, wrote Virginia Stern. So did Decker, who parodied a broad spectrum of London society, from youths aspiring to be gentlemen in the Gull's Horn Book, to papists and the Double PP, to con artists and the Bellman of London. Decker wrote News from Hell, the devil's answer to Nash's Pierce Penniless. So Decker literally wrote an unauthorized sequel to Nash. Okay. All right. And it's in perfect Nash speak, eulogizing Nash. And thou, Nash, into whose soul, if ever were a Pythagorean metempsychosis, the raptures of that fire and inconfinable Italian spirit were bounteously and boundlessly infused, though sometimes secretary to Pierce Penniless, which says you are sometimes secretary to Pierce Penniless. Who was Nash a secretary of?
Was it Oxford?
Oxford.
Yeah.
So Oxford is Pierce Penniless. And Decker is pointing that out. Decker is aware of that. So
Is that a joke on Oxford being broke?
yeah, he spent all his money like a profligate. And master of his requests, ingenious or ingenuous, fluent, facetious Thomas Nash, get leave for thy ghost to come from to her abiding and to dwell with me a while, till she hath caroused me in her own wonted full measures of wit, that my plump brains may swell and burst into bitter invectives against the lieutenant of limbo, if he cashier pierce penniless with dead pay. So yeah, that just kind of sounds like Nash.
And as we noted in that, I think it was the Nash Decker video, or maybe it was even the Stephanie Hopkins one, but it was, maybe it was the Nash Decker one, is that, Decker will come in also talking like Nash and swinging at Nash's, like, old enemies or whatever, too, right? Yeah, kind of picking up and even using some of, like, the same verbiage or same lines or whatever I want to say.
We'll see that in just a second. In Fortunatus attributed to Decker, we hear, "My tongue speaks no language, but an almond for a parrot and crack me this nut." If you guys are familiar with Nash, he has a pamphlet called "An Almond for a Parrot," and he has another one called "Crack Me This Nut." Okay, well, Decker's saying, I only talk like Nash. Moreover, in Decker's "The Bellman of London," the speech praising beggars evokes another on the same subject in Summer's Last Will and Testament, and ends with, "Peace, cries the penniless orator." Peace being a pun on Pierce, Further stretching coincidence, Decker parodied the interests of Nash's enemies. So why would Decker parody the Harveys? The Harveys weren't writing in the pamphlet war past like 95. Why would Decker post 98 be taking jabs at the Harveys?
Supposed to be like this young guy, like, what beef does he have with any of these people? Other than, I guess,
Decker's
I
supposed to be
like
5 years younger than Nash, and Nash is himself 17 years younger than Oxford, which, there you go, 17. So, further stretching coincidence, Decker parodied the interests of Nash enemies, Gabriel, Richard, and John Harvey. The title of The Wonderful Year, a pamphlet by Decker, is a play on Harvey's Gorgon, or The Wonderful Year, while Decker's O Perseo is a takeoff on a Harvey nickname for Nash. Paraphrasing. A Persea is in both Strange News and Dr. Faustus. Decker's Lanthorn and Candlelight contains a story about a rope maker called Richard Harvey, who is a parlous, sour fellow, ill-loved of his neighbors. In Decker's Satyromastics, a character says, Respice funum, meaning, think on the rope's end. The same pun on Respice finum, think on your end, that Nash jabbed Harvey with in Strange News, which is also included in a scene with a Gabriel Harvey like Dr. Pinch in the Comedy of Errors. So it's in all three. And it's the same mangling of a Latin phrase, Respice finum, think on your end. But no, they turn it to think on the rope's end. And why would you do that otherwise? And why would Decker do that if he's not the same pen name? Or the same person, whatever it is. Okay, the unusual counter-argument that one would encounter...
It makes me just think of the genie's me, yourself, dude.
The usual counter-argument that one would encounter with Murphy's argument is that Decker and Nash's styles do not exactly align. Nash is bitter, biting. Decker has a kind of homey feel to him sometimes. I've described him as almost Frank Capra-like, as seen in The Shoemaker's Holiday. So how do you reconcile that? How do you get somebody that's like, I don't know, Woody Allen level of biting satirical out of something from like Frank Capra, you know? But remember, Frank Capra himself, his most successful thing is when he got dark. It's a Wonderful Life, which he disowned because it wasn't well received, which is why it got played on TV for free and got picked up by NBC, and that's why it's still shown every Christmas. That said, we can sort of reconcile that because Decker's not always homey. He's homey in certain plays for certain purposes because he's hitting certain tones, but like if you go read his pamphlets, he's pretty darn biting, guys. Furthermore, most of Nash's works that we have is pamphlets. It's outside of drama. We don't really have Nash's dramas. And Nash's one drama, it's satirical, but it's not really biting. It's very allegorical. And everything else is his biting pamphlet stuff. So if he was sitting there writing, 20, 30 plays for a company and openly writing it as Thomas Nash, I think we'd get some homey, kind of comfortable, middle-of-the-road family value scenes. I don't think it's always going to be, vulgarity and craziness and, So, same thing with Decker. If Decker was only writing pamphlets in an era where you were allowed to be satirical, because remember, Decker's writing after that stuff's banned. If Decker got to write when that stuff's pre-banned, it'd probably look exactly like Thomas Nash. And so, consider Decker's going to be stylistically different because it's post-Bishop's ban. And if Decker looks too much like Thomas Nash, is it going to be very good cover? They're going to spot it in 2 seconds. Wait, Thomas Decker's just Thomas Nash. So, that said, Thomas Decker often collaborates. So when he collaborates, he can hide himself, which is counter to the Oxfordian narrative. But guys, start opening up to that idea. Okay, Fletcher parodies a Thomas and Monsieur Thomas, whose main character, and this is John Fletcher, the playwright, and this is 1612, 1613, whose main character is a troublemaker and fiery nature. At one point in the play, he scolds a woman saying, "I'll kill thy parrot." There we go, almond for a parrot. "Hang up thy small hound, and drink away thy dowry to a penny." Clearly all references to Nash's works. What's thy small hound? I'm trying to remember what thy small...
Isle of the Dogs?
Thank you. Yes, Isle of the Dogs, thank you. And yeah, down to a penny, that's Pierce Penniless. However, the character seems to be parodying someone living and not a long dead, gone legendary figure like Nash. At that point, Nash is getting eulogized and stuff. Nobody's going to be parodying him. Thomas states he no longer attends horse races. This is the character in the play. And that he is set to marry a woman named Mary. Well, Decker published A Strange Horse Race in 1613, which is the same time as this play. Sometime right before or after this play, and one of the few records we have of Decker is that Mary, wife of Thomas Deckers, was buried at Clerkenwell in 1616. So one of the few pieces of evidence that may line up with this Thomas Decker character is that he was married to some lady named Mary. Okay, well, it's Monsieur Thomas here, horse races and Mary, but also quoting Nash. The two are getting conflated. And this is something that not just Fletcher does. Ben Jonson's going to do it too. Ben Jonson similarly conflates Nash and Decker, threatening to commit Demetrius, which is Decker, which Stotsenberg gets backwards, and Crispinius, Marston, to the Hospital of Fools. Well, Nash seems to have translated Garzoni's Hospital of Incurable Fools, which was published anonymously in 1600 by Blunt. It's published anonymously because if it's, put out as Nash, he's supposed to be gone. Okay, but here we go. Murphy also mentions that Decker's prolific practice of collaboration may have helped disguise 42% of the 60 existing pieces associated with Decker were printed anonymously. So Murphy offers counter-arguments to her own theory. The handwriting's not the same. That doesn't bother me. People can change their hands or you can get people to write for you. We don't have that much handwriting. Ben Jonson says he loved Nash, but he seems to beef with Decker. I think that's also explicable. But I think that goes into, is Ben Jonson really Ben Jonson? What happens with Gabriel Harvey? All that kind of stuff. Okay, so here's some actual spots. In Pierce Penniless, we get Sol, Re, Mi, Fa. That is to say, Solus Rexus me facit. Only the King of Spain made me Pope. In Decker's The Noble Spanish Soldier. Sol, Re, Ma, Me, Fa, Mi. I have it now. Solus Rexus me facit miserum. Alas, poor lady, tell her no apothecary in Spain has any. So we got both the Sol, Re, Mi, Fa, Solus Rex, and
Spain.
Yeah. What?
Yeah, why even work that line in that way? And yeah, it's a very deliberate line, especially when you see it with those other parts of it.
Yeah.
It's like.
Okay, Saffron Walden. Far more boisterous and cumbersome than a pair of Swisser's omnipotent galley breeches. Noble Spanish soldier. And that may be a typo on my part. Those goblins have bladdered cheeks puffed out like a Swisser's breeches. So, Swiss pants or breeches are big and puffy. Nash mentions...
And big, you just said that.
Nash mentions De Art Babindi, The Art of Drinking, and Pierce Penniless, and... SLWT, what does this stand for? Summer's Last Will and Testament. Decker's The Goldshorn Book, to take Bacchanalian degrees and to wait himself in Arte Babinde Magister. So that was a super deep cut book. That wasn't like a super popular book. That was like some super deep cut Italian book that talked about how cool drinking was. And like Nash and Decker both referencing. Okay. Nash's Linton stuff. The gods and goddesses all in a row from Ops to Amona. The first Applewife. Decker's, this is a typo too. I think this is supposed to be Satyromastix. That's to show their antiquity is coming from Eve, who was an Applewife. No, this is from Patient Gristle, I think. So, Applewife. What does that mean? It means somebody who sells apples. First listing in the dictionary for Applewife is Nash. Second listing in the dictionary for Applewife is Decker. But then we also have Decker uses the phrase Apple Women and Lady Jane. That's the Thomas Wyatt play that I was mentioning. And so Apple Women, Apple Wife, there you go. Nash's Unfortunate Traveler. Chylum Petimus Stultitia. Decker's what is GH?
Goldshorn Book.
Thank you. Chylum Petimus Stultitia. The actual correct quotation from Horace is Chylum Ipsum Petimus Stultitia.
What does that mean in Latin?
I should have looked it up. Chylum means sky.
Because guess who has some direct Horace quotes in his work that we can actually point to and be like, he actually literally says, and Horace says this.
Yeah, Sidney.
Who does this? Sidney says it.
And, Ben Johnson's supposed to be the big Horace guy, too. And so it's like, I don't know, everybody seems to be into Horace or something else weird is happening. But they both totally mess up the quotation. And this is only quoted 2 other times in the period, and the other 2 times they're quoted correctly. They're quoting the exact same rare thing incorrectly. Guys, that's to me pretty darn damning. Both Nash and Decker write in great praise of actor John Bentley. However, consider John Bentley dies in 1585 when Decker's supposed to be a kid, because Decker's not born until 72 apparently. So Decker would have only been like 12 years old, 13 years old. Why would he be talking about John Bentley in such praise that Nash also does? And they're both people that don't give praise that often. Decker gives more praise than Nash. Okay, here's another weird thing. Nash writes a pamphlet called Terrors of the Night, which is about nightmares. Decker writes a pamphlet called Decker's His Dream, which is about dreams. Okay, here's a quote. All rheums, poses, sciaticas, dropsies, and gouts are diseases of their phlegmatic engendering. Okay, here's Decker. Bleak agues, apoplexies, mirrors, catarrhs, coughs, dropsies, rheums, and diseases that make wars. Okay, that's pretty similar. Saffron Walden. Hey, ding-a-ding, up with your petticoat, have at your plum tree. You know what plum tree means?
Phallic or...
other one.
Oh.
But yes, I perceive there cannot be a new book come forth, but you will have a fling at it. Decker's The Sun's Darling. I must and will have a fling at one of her plum trees. Decker's Patient Gristle. By cod, I swear terrible to nog her paid and fling her spindle legs at plum trees. So, there we go, plum trees. That's another rare one. Rare words shared between the 2 writers. Backfriend, Friskin, Extemporare, Scotch Saddle. Sorry, this is supposed to be Extempore and Scotch Saddle. Parapetical. Extremely rare words shared between the 2. Anthropophagize, Sea Beef. Mother Man Pudding. Like, why repeat mother mam pudding? Sea beef. Gamet R. Calamanco. Swine snout. Court holy bread. Huffy tufty. Diagenical. Greasy doublet. Nowlum. Sick probo. There are more idiosyncrasies yet that the two seem to uniquely share. Both believed music instruments and drove tigers to madness. Both called a fool's coat which had an extra pair of sleeves a coat with 4 elbows. Both parodied Richard Stanihurst's use of onomatopoeia in his Aeneid. Both maintain that prostitutes sell themselves to the devil in disguise. Nash mentions in The Whore of Babylon in 2 pieces. Decker writes a play called The Whore of Babylon. Both mention the practice of a new mayor painting the posts of the gate or fence of his new official residence. Like, guys, why mention that? That's not like a influential... Oh, I stole that from Nash. I'm going to mention that mayors paint their fence posts gates once they get elected. Like, I stole that one from Nash. Haha. No, that's just something you put in. And why would they also put it in on top of coincidentally sharing all this?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Both feature a character called Hammond, a reference to Gray's Inn attorney Thomas Hammond, whom Heywood dedicates the 1633 Jew of Malta to. So there you go. There's the circling back in on Marlowe. So this is all just from her 24-page essay. She shows much, 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 much more in her other stuff. Her 2 big longer pieces, and she connects it back to Shakespeare in her 2 big longer pieces too. But I wanted to just key in, since let's take it that Stotsenberg has shown Decker is in Shakespeare. We've now shown that Nash is in Decker. Let's go look at Prechter, and let me preface some of this.
I was looking up that Latin line from Horace, and I think it. From what I'm trying to find here, it may mean something like, we attack heaven itself with stupidity.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Column sky, heaven, there you go. So, this isn't a summation of his book, as I've mentioned earlier. I have not gotten a chance to read his book. All I've looked at is all the free material. I wish I did a better job of going over his actual proof, but I had so many issues with what I was coming across that this ends up becoming a huge criticism. That said, go check out his 2 videos on Thomas Nash, Oxford is Nash, Part 1 and Part 2. I think they're on the Oxford Fellowship channel. They're good stuff. For the most part, I think he's totally spot on, showing that Nash is all about De Vere. It would be weird to say that this is somebody else that's not De Vere writing this. Maybe De Vere is paying somebody to do all this. That's the best thing that I could see some mainstream counter-argument being. Otherwise, Nash sure looks a heck of a lot like Edward De Vere, and it's not just internal biographical stuff, all sorts of historical dates, but other people seem to say this. Gabriel Harvey seems to make mention of it. Maybe Ben Jonson as well. I forget. But that said, his whole cohesive theory outside of Nash and maybe some of his Green and Lily stuff. Okay. Outside of that, though, it begins to get very circular. And it begins to turn into, this writer sounds a lot like Shakespeare. We know that Oxford is Shakespeare. We know that Oxford uses other names. Therefore, this must be Oxford. And then if he finds any sort of external evidence that could be suggestive of that, he feels, I've concluded it to be the case. And I don't think that that's super sound, and there's a few things that I came across here that show that, okay, there are some gaps in his theory, and it's coming about because of logical leaps that he's making. So, his main point is that over time, from as early as the 60s, Oxford toyed with pen names and went from using to the cover of lesser writers, where he would ghostwrite for an actual small-time writer for a poem or two, just say, hey, slip this into your collection, and move on to another cover writer, to sort of creating his own pen names in the maybe 70s or 80s, where he would use them for extended amounts of time and maybe even build personas or use employees as sort of Alan M. stand-ins for the pen names. And to the point where maybe he's literally hiring people for that effect. I don't know if Prechter goes that far to say it, but I don't think that that's crazy. Like hiring John Lilly or Gabriel Harvey to pick one to be your pen name, I think that's interesting. William Adlington. Not as familiar with William Adlington. Let me know how to check that out. I'd be interested. Okay. All right. So some of the names that he pitches, and as Apollo mentioned earlier, he says like 150 names. These are just some of the ones that he talks about the most. Shakespeare, Lilly, Nash, Green, Peele, Golding is an Arthur Golding, which is De Vere's uncle. Thomas Lodge, Samuel Daniel, Thomas Kidd, Chris Marlowe, William Warner, Richard Barnfield, Giles Fletcher, others. There's others. Plenty others. And to be fair, sometimes he says these voices are 100% Oxford. That Oxford is everything that you read by that person is going to be Oxford. Sometimes he's like, no, these are actual people. They're writing their stuff. And Oxford is slipping his stuff into them, but not necessarily collaborating. The Golden Ass. Okay, I will check that out as well. And that totally makes sense because Thomas Decker has a play called The Golden Ass.
And we've already, I think Daniel Cowan would have more to say on that ass metaphor too, and all the references to the Oxford stuff.
So
right?
that totally checks out.
Yes. Okay, yes.
And like I was mentioning earlier, I think so much of what Prechter's saying about the early ones are totally spot on. I think if William Adlington's doing something called The Golden Ass, and Oxford is translating Apuleius in 1566, then William Adlington could be one of these many voices. But just want to say that Decker's probably the continuation of those voices into the Henslowe era. Okay. So I'm not a huge fan of his overall theory. Not that I think he's wrong on a lot of these spots, but that this is only coming from Oxford, I think is so isolating, limiting, and restricting that it becomes a little unwieldy, and we get to the point where anything that sounds like Shakespeare must be Oxford, and it can't be anyone else, and we start to build Oxford's canon to the point where it's not logistically possible. Oh, right on. Thanks, Tom Ditto. Yeah. And so, yes, full on with all that. Agree with all that. That said, I have no problem with the multi-pseudonymity, so the idea that he's using many pen names. And I think the possibility is super likely. But I think it's likely with not just one person, Edward de Vere. I think there's other people that are going to be using multiple pen names throughout this Elizabethan onto the Jacobean period. I think Francis Bacon probably is going to be doing that. I think Philip Sidney's probably going to be doing that. Mary Sidney's probably going to be doing that. Walter Raleigh probably going to be doing that. They're all writers. They're all courtly poets. Maybe they're not all dramatists, but for the most part, they all seem pretty interested in drama. So let me see. My problem is both Prechter and Conrad's theories. This is all the Oxfordian equivalent of what I think Bash and Conrad is doing with his Marlovian theory, which he's the one that coined that term multi-pseudonymity, and I kind of like that. My problem is that both Prechter and Conrad's theories are logically flawed on a structural level. They suffer from circular reasoning and fall prey to generalizing fallacies. In short, they both assume, for nondescript reasons, that the work of Shakespeare can only be penned by one hand. And from this, they reason that any convincing set of authorial parallelisms must be yet another pen of their guy. And as soon as you get rid of the assumption that Shakespeare is one person, all this becomes a lot less unwieldy, and you can maybe start to reason things out. So I 100% agree that Lilly, Green, Peele, Lodge, Daniel, Kidd, Barnfield, even Warner have convincing enough amount of parallels to suggest common authorship or co-authorship collaboration with Shakespeare and or De Vere. I'm not familiar with Hackett or Cuddy. I think Fletcher's debatable. Interesting to note, he never mentions Bartholomew Griffin in any of the stuff I could find, who seems to literally plagiarize and reuse several lines of Samuel Daniel sonnets. So not to mention, Prechter seems totally unaware of all the stuff that we've just shown. Because Prechter does not list the Henslowe writers. He does not list Thomas Dekker as a voice of Oxford. He specifically cites that Dekker and Drayton and any of those writers that are in Henslowe cannot be a voice of Oxford. He says they cannot. They are not a voice of Oxford. And I find that weird. I find that absolutely bizarre. And like, why? We just showed you 12 pages worth of stuff that Nash and Shakespeare have tons in common with Dekker. That Drayton has a bunch in common with Shakespeare. There's a bunch we didn't show you. So why go through all this work to pinpoint these bizarre writers from the 60s and 70s and then completely ignore the Henslowe diary names who are going on at the heyday of the period? I'm kind of at a loss. But I thought about it. So what?
So I guess Tom Ditto says that apparently you have to read the whole book, because he says you haven't read the book, because I guess he does do that.
Okay, and let me know where I stray wrong, Tom Ditto. And I mentioned several times I haven't read his book, and he does cover Henslowe, which I'm going to show you. Yeah, if Prechter would give me a free copy, I will. But until then, like I said, I've gone over every single bit of his free material. So here's why he doesn't say Henslowe names. Because as soon as he does, his framework of explanation kind of tumbles down and dozens of questions arise. Is the Henslowe diary suspect? Why the collaboration? What do the payments in that signify? Which one of them is De Vere? Could it be more than one? Are all the names legitimate and not worth suspicion? Or are other people using pen names? Why both admirals and Lord Chamberlain's men? And beyond these questions, my guess is that, like many Oxfordians, Prechter has placed religious value on the solo candidate claim. And indeed, I seem to have been correct, as Prechter makes the following statement. Here you go, Tom. Yes, $100 is a lot of money, dude. We're sitting here trying to pay 157 euros to Oxford University Bodleian Library to get a copy of a manuscript. I don't have another $100 to go for Prechter's stuff. If he wants to give me a free copy. Yes, I'm aware of the forgeries in Henslowe. Would you? Okay. Henslowe staged several plays, and this is Prechter's words. Henslowe staged several plays written by Shakespeare, but Shakespeare's name is absent from his voluminous notes, even though his notes cover precisely the 17-year period during which, according to orthodoxy, Will Shakespeare came to London, towered over his colleagues. The absence of any mention of Shakespeare in Henslowe's diary is a serious strike against the traditional story, but fits our cases not only for true author's anonymity, but also for his independence from collaborators, as argued in the Shakespeare chapter. Well, there you go, folks. He doesn't want to talk about Henslowe because he wants to keep Shakespeare pristine. He does not want there to be any collaborators. It's got to be 100% De Vere.
Like, it just showed you that, like, the problem with Shakespeare is that, like, it's a giant Frankenstein of a bunch of other people. So yeah. It's like, and I guess you could be like, well, it's just those 100 other Frankenstein. It's all just De Vere. He chopped himself up and then put them all back together. It's like, really, for why, for what reason? And then, like, that's a lot of legwork that you kind of have to begin to show, like, which author is he in that case, and which persona did he step into?
And why these personas?
Yeah, and some of those lines reused are sort of like, they're kind of strange in how they even get edited together in that sense. But
and okay, so there we go. There's why he's coming from this angle. Let's see what the consequences of that is, and maybe some of his other further statements. He further states, it is a striking fact that Henslowe recorded the names of not one of Oxford's playwriting voices, not Lilly, not Greene, not Lodge, not Peele, not Shakespeare. He puts on plays later attributed to Robert Greene, but he does not mention them by name. Henslowe's purported mention of Thomas Nash turned out to be forgeries by Collier. I think Henslowe knew the true source of the Voices plays. That's why he left Oxford's name and the Voices out of his records. Okay. Did you spot what was stupid in there? Did you spot what was asinine in that? Okay, I did. Okay, Lilly's not in there because Lilly's done writing plays by 91. Henslowe does not list any names till 1597. Okay, so there. Lilly shouldn't be listed. Okay, Greene. Greene is dead by 92. 92 is once again that's before 97. Okay. All right. Peele died in 95. 95, that's before 97 too? Okay, wow. Lodge, he is done writing plays by 90 or 91. That's before 97. Okay. The only one of those that should be in the diary that is not is indeed Shakespeare. Okay. Nash shouldn't be in the diary. Nash is gone and disappeared by the time these entries are in here. And it's convenient that the entries pop up right at that time.
Yeah, we've talked about this. We've talked about this, yeah. And the exact time period that you would be really convenient to see Shakespeare on there, he's not there. Oh, but we're going to go and all these are Shakespeare plays. We're just going to go, Thomas Dekker, yeah, he wrote Troilus and Cressida. Or, Dick Munch or whatever. Yes. He wrote, The Tragedy of King Lear. That's totally not the same one. But
go to the wiki and pull up George Peele.
Okay. Just the basic, basic whimsy.
Yeah,
okay.
George Peele.
George Peele.
Death date uncertain. Scroll down. Yes, there we go. We get Mira's statement that Peele died by the pox.
And Green saying that he has been driven to extreme shifts for a living.
Yep. And the conventional dating.
Okay. So died of the pox, according to Mira, is buried on 1596.
Okay, 96. There we go. Okay, still before 97. There we go.
We need to check all the source too. I don't know where the source is from. We need to probably Lewis and Verba and just make sure. But
for sure. But he's done. He's gone playwriting. He's done by 1595. Before 1597. Just want to point that out. He should not be in Henslowe, according to our understanding. Okay. You can go back to the slide.
Oh, Peele wrote Musidorus? That's
what they say.
Okay.
It's in this Apocrypha book because it was printed as Shakespeare. They also attribute it to Green. Okay.
Okay, so you were talking about all the problems with this statement or his.
That's a good question. When Peele sentenced, and Peele being Oxford's a little reductive. Oxford is in Peele. Oxford is in the plays that we attribute to Peele. In some cases, could be using the pseudonym or spy name Peele, but it's not just Oxford. Okay. This unfortunately shows Prechter's true colors. This is an ignorant statement. It seems like Prechter has never looked at the Henslowe diary, is somehow unaware of the dating of the whole discussion. The section of the Henslowe diary which lists the names covers from 97 to 02. In our most popular video, we show Lily Lodge, Watson Green, Marlowe, Kidd, Peele, Nash are all dead or retired by 97. Is Prechter seriously unaware of these facts? Henslowe isn't leaving these names out to aid in Oxford's secrecy. He leaves these names out because they're gone, they're retired. Indeed, the only voice of Oxford, or rather the only active playwright of the era not mentioned, is Shakespeare. There's a bigger explanation here. Okay.
As far as also a bigger explanation, there's a bigger picture here, because once again, this sort of thing about, I think that Henslowe he's really just keeping a cover because, he knows the real stakes, and in Oxford, he's just he's gonna be your cultural daddy genius, but he's got to hide away. He can't take too much.
Yeah.
He can't take too much credit for it because of whatever reason or whatever. This is bigger than just look, I wrote some plays and I don't want my aristocratic friends to pick on me or whatever.
This is so much more.
This is so much more important than I want my names on the plays and blah. It's there are political reasons for all that hiding it, I'm sure, but it's not because of they're gonna pick on me if they see that I write plays and everyone's gonna call me this and that.
So,
and I can't even if they do like my play, they can't even come out and say it. It's so dumb and lame. It's dude, this is so dumb. Trying to even paint this sort of soap opera drama of this. That's what I sort of get frustrated about. Is that the actual implications of the Shakespeare is not oh wow, there's some cool stuff. It's no. Yeah, look at all this we talked talked about at the top of the
geopolitical stuff.
Yeah, look at all this money stuff happening. Look at all this change in like vernacular and culture. Look at all this like religious fervor, the Protestantism sort of whipping up and versus Catholic. Yeah, it's so much more than just like I want to write
the Mozart take. I'm tired of the Mozart take
yes,
as well.
Yes.
And like Mozart's great stuff. Sure, but like let's look at this beyond just this solo genius idea, because we have a whole factory or industry of literature coming out over 50, 60, 70-year period. Okay.
And it's like, what's Lord Burleigh's real name again, real quick?
Cecil.
Oh, yeah, okay. So you want to tell us, we'll look at one letter from Peel to Cecil. It's like, dude, like, add it to the pile. We got so many letters from all these different people. And trying to call into question, like, how some of these letters are highly sort of strange, and how do we know that they're not encoded or ironic or got weird stuff going on, too?
I'll definitely check it out, Tom. I for sure will.
Yeah,
but,
exactly. Yeah.
I got to get going with this. Some other things that Prechter seems to err on or miss. He mentions Fulk Greville must have known the author's true identity because he never speaks about Shakespeare. But he fails to mention Fulk's possibly apocryphal dying wish that he wanted to be remembered as master of both Shakespeare and Jonson, which indeed suggests he did know Shakespeare's identity. But it also suggests that Ben Jonson's identity is suspect.
Which we definitely are a fan of.
No Oxfordians are saying, including Prechter. Nobody ever questions Jonson. I think that's absurd. Okay. Super questionable things that he says about the Sidneys. He quotes Spenser's Tears of the Muses, and this is what's really going to piss you off, Brady, which states that our pleasant Willie, is dead of late, with whom all joy and jolly merriment is also dead, and our dolour drent. He then states that scholars have claimed this as Tarleton, but that B.M. Ward, supreme Oxfordian and Lily scholar, says that this is actually about Philip Sidney. So B.M. Ward, who Strip Matter was pulling up in that video, and who I've pulled up before for the Lily stuff, and he says, it's Sidney. Okay. Sidney's called Willie, which is one of the reasons that Stotsenberg spots Sidney in the sonnets. He then states that but Prechter tosses this aside, and he says Sidney was neither a comic nor a playwright. We've shown in many videos this is an egregious generalization. Sidney, at the very least, composes dramatic masks. His Arcadia, which is a tragic comedy, is structured in 5 acts like a play and written mostly in dialogue. He wrote the major critique of the era on playwriting in defense of poetry. If B.M. Ward says Sidney, let's actually look into that. And sure enough, Prechter continues by saying that most scholars actually think Willie is a reference to John Lilly. So Spencer's writing that John Lilly is no longer writing anymore, I guess. And this is like, responding to John Lilly retiring, which if you watch a video or two ago of ours and refuting Strip Matter, I make a big pitch that Sidney is part of Lilly. And sure enough, these scholars are conflating the two. Or not conflating the two, and they need to be. Spenser praises another poet who is generally presumed to be Michael Drayton. And here, though not least, is Aetion. A gentler shepherd may nowhere be found, whose muse full of high thoughts invention doth like himself heroically sound. According to some critics, however, for these words, Spenser has been credited with making one of the earliest allusions to Shakespeare. Brazil noted that the Vere's family coat of arms is topped with an eagle, and Aetion is the Greek word for eagle. Looney, however, dispensed with this interpretation a century ago, when, however, in Shakespeare, in the following lines he places Philip Sidney first among the poets to whom he is alluding, we cannot accept Aetion as Shakespeare without discrediting Spenser's judgment. Prechter adds that he agrees with Looney's interpretation. So wait. This can't be a reference to Shakespeare because Spenser thinks Sidney is better than Aetion? Or just that Spenser thinks Sidney is the best of the poets? So, can't be a reference because if that was the case, then that would be Spenser saying Sidney was better than De Vere, and he knew better than to say that. And it's like, that's bad logic. That's bad reasoning. You guys are being arbitrary and picking and choosing.
Yeah.
Specifically Bob Proctor here. And sure enough, if it is a reference to Michael Drayton and Shakespeare, and it's pointing to Sidney, maybe, just maybe, Sidney is Drayton as Shakespeare. Just saying. That's not even my usual pitch, but just maybe. Okay? So, look. This is devoid of all logic and enters the realm of subjective claims and quality and normativity. One, it assumes Spencer can't think anyone better than Shakespeare, which, maybe Spencer did think Sidney was better than Shakespeare. Who knows? It requires us to agree with that statement as well, that we must think it's crazy to think that. And it also highlights how Oxfordians claim De Vere is some great poet of the 80s, but then also claim that the sonnet's not really being written till 1590 or later. And so it's like, wait, then what are De Vere's great 80s poems? Because I've read those 20 poems you got online, and they're not great, right? They're not the best. So what is this massive amount that already makes them some great poets in the 80s? And I know Prechter's like, oh, it's all this other stuff. But hey, let's for a second remember there's an actual guy that we know for sure was writing poetry in the 80s, and his name's Philip Sidney. Okay, he claims Mary Sidney did not write her closet play, Tragedy of Antony. I assume he's saying this is really a Daniel play, thus Oxford's, but I'm not sure. He does say she wrote her Psalms. Of course, he's mum about the Arcadia. He's probably not going to go read the Arcadia.
Who can?
So here's some more questionable statements. This book of Thomas Edwards shows that the Earl of Oxford wrote by far the most and best poetry of the Elizabethan era, making him worthy of Edwards' description as the only star. But Prechter shows us the poem never directly states Oxford's name. It requires interpretation. Furthermore, Prechter undercuts this twice by showing that Edwards was unaware of Daniel being part of Shakespeare, thus not in the know of the voices, and that more importantly, Thomas Nash, the main voice under investigation here, attacks Edwards' poem in 1596. Prechter tries to defend this by saying that Nash thought the poem by Anthony Chute, who he was beefing with during the Harvey Nash Wars, but that suggests that Nash, De Vere, whoever, could not even make the interpretive reading that Prechter himself is making. So none of that really adds up. There's Thomas Edwards stuff. Throw it away. Toss it out. Prechter states that Johnson's Cynthia Revels makes reference to Lodge's Rosalind, which contains a revealing reference to Robert Greene, hinting that he is a voice. Brisk, a character, comments about his love's wit, quote, "She does observe as pure a phrase and has used choice figures in her ordinary conferences as any be in the Arcadia," naming the popular pastoral romance by Sir Philip Sidney. His wry companion remarks, or rather in Greene's works, whence she may steal with more security. He goes on to state that Johnson has been misunderstood here and that folks are missing the joke, saying any devoted fan of Johnson would have to admit that Johnson's extensive knowledge of the literature of the day excludes any possibility that Johnson thought Greene was less known than Sidney. So what then is the basis of this joke? Knowing about Oxford's voices allows us a better explanation for the meaning of the line. Brisk's lady could steal securely from Greene because Greene was a pseudonym for someone who had to remain anonymous. No one, including Oxford himself, could complain openly about plagiarism from Robert Greene. But he is clearly ignoring the fact that Johnson's saying the writer is stealing from Sidney. In fact, Johnson seems to be sort of equating Greene and Sidney here, right? Remember, Musidorus, the most popular play of the whole era, which we saw was attributed to Peele, but also attributed to Greene. Musidorus is one of the main characters of the Arcadia, and is derived from the Arcadia. So there may be some Greene-Sidney connections worth looking into. Relatedly, in his Blueborn Tavern interview, Prechter is put against the wall with an on-the-spot question. If Greene is Oxford, then why did Robert Greene make a dedication to the Earl of Leicester? Oh, Oxford hates Leicester so much. They hate each other. Then why is Greene, one of his voices, making a dedication to Leicester? Well, and, by the way, Leicester himself documented paying for that. Paid £5 for that dedication. Okay. Prechter takes this as a question regarding whether Greene is a real figure or not, and rambles on about how Greene isn't well documented at Cambridge, and we can see that Greene doesn't ever eat any meals at Cambridge and never pays for any meals. Was that what the question was about? I'm sorry, the question was, why is Robert Greene, a supposed voice of this guy, writing a dedication, being paid by this guy to write a dedication, who is Oxford's biggest enemy in history on the planet, according to your theory?
Yeah. Unless, we already kind of got y'all, I think, in some of that court or the tilt yard thing where DeVere has to come out and sort of kowtow to Sydney, essentially, in front of, like, everybody.
Yep.
So,
circa 1581. So, like, we're Brady and I are past that. You guys got to get past that, too. You got to start connecting Oxford and Leicester. You got to start connecting Oxford and Sydney. And, guys, like, that one was egregious to me. I had to turn off that interview and, like, rewatch it later because he just totally skirts by the question. I forget the guy's name that asked him the question. He's the only one on Blue Board that I...
Is he the Folk Gravel guy?
No. It's a middle-aged guy, younger guy, a little bit bigger guy.
Okay.
I forget his name, but he's got some witty... He's fun. And he seems well-read, and he never tries to push his own stuff. He was just asking Prechter, and Prechter just kind of... Well, if you're asking if Robert Greene's a real person... We know that he doesn't have any documents at Cambridge, and it's like, that's not what he's asking. Answer the question.
Yeah.
Why would Oxford ever
what
write
are the
for
political...
Leicester?
What is happening here politically? And if, like, y'all's narrative, like you just pointed out...
You ignored it, and he did. He fully ignored it, and I could tell the guy was a little disappointed, and it's like, all right, I guess you don't have anything for that. And he didn't. So, Brady and I might have something to say about that.
Oxford dedicated 4 books to Leicester?
And so, yes, that's like, what we need.
Yeah.
That's what we need
right?
to rework the theory on, because this whole idea that they hate each other and that they would never work together, that's silly. And I think what we get with the Queen's Men is a compactifying of Leicester's, Sussex, and Oxford's men into your best people. And I think coincidentally that's right when John Lilly pops on the scene. John Lilly isn't necessarily usually connected with the Queen's Men, but I think the two things are too coincidental to say that, no, the Queen's Men pops on the scene and all of a sudden we get Lily, and then into Green and Marlowe and Kidd, we get all the best stuff popping up. No, that's not coincidence. Okay. Alright. Soon after explaining that Philip Sidney's extended family was involved in both the court and the literary arts and might have taken offense at plagiarism, complained publicly, Prechter states that Daniel, a voice of Oxford William Shakespeare, dedicates a play to Mary Sidney. These statements seem at odds in that, on the one hand, Oxford is super distant from Leicester in the Sidney circle and is verging on a literary dispute, but then on the other hand is full of praise, like he is Mary Sidney's servant, which Samuel Daniel was supposed to be Mary Sidney's servant.
He went and lived with her or whatever, right?
He was supposed to be her kid's tutor and stuff. Like, that's weird to say if it's Oxford.
And what is it? Yeah, Daniel's the one who pops up on the scene and has the manuscript of Arcadia, or he has one of Sidney's things or whatever, right?
Astrophill and Stella.
He's hanging out with Dybroker or
Dymoke,
yeah.
And that's probably how he gets the Astrophil and Stella manuscripts, which Thomas Nash is supposed to be part of leaking.
So yeah, if Daniel is
Oxford has a poem in that Astrophil and Stella manuscript, like by Oxford himself. So like, I don't know. Trying to fully. Oh,
there, keep going.
Sorry, camera went off, guys, but we're gonna keep going. Trying to fully wrap our minds around when and why people use the pseudonym and why they don't. It's like that still hasn't been fully explained. But trying to say Samuel Daniel is Oxford is a big stretch for me, guys.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
That goes through our hearts.
Like, well, Samuel Daniel is well attested to be around after 1604. In fact, he has a pretty big job in 1605, the year after Oxford's supposed to die. So I don't know where Prechter's going with that. Samuel Daniel is all over Shakespeare, but to assume that just because Samuel Daniel's all over Shakespeare that there's marginal indirect connections between him and Oxford, to say that is a voice of Oxford, I think that's a little silly. That's a little premature. And I don't think that's using very good logic.
So go watch our True Shakespeare.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah. Go watch our True Shakespeare videos. Brady saying in the distance while he's fixing the camera. So Daniel's a voice that struggles. I struggle to agree at all with Prechter on. Daniel is supposed to have been a live-in tutor to Mary Sidney, to Mary Sidney's kids. Why in the world would Oxford do that? Daniel's best friends with Mountjoy. What connections does Oxford have to Mountjoy? Same with Greville or Robert Devereux. He's living with these people, guys. Like, Yeah, the portraits of De Vere are super suspect. Like, they don't look like the same person. I think I've seen 3 portraits and none of them look like the same person. That's a good point, Sultron. Let's see. Oh, we're back, folks.
Or we're about to be back.
We're about to be back. Okay. So Prechter digs up a pretty good passage from the Parnassus plays, which he thinks show a reference to Oxford. Indeed, he could be right. I just wanted to point out that conveniently every one of these references could easily be about Sidney himself, which yes, may require one to look past the death date in 1586, but I'm totally open and willing to say that we should do that. Oh, sir, that was my care to prove a complete gentleman, to be tam marte quam mercurio, insomuch that I am pointed at for a poet in Paul's churchyard, and in the tilt yard for a champion. Nay, every man inquires after my abode. Gnats are unnoticed, wheresoever they fly, but eagles waited on with every eye. I had in my days not unfitly likened to Sir Philip Sidney, only with this difference, that I had the better leg and more amiable face. His Arcadia was pretty, so were my sonnets. He had been at Paris, I at Padua. He fought, and so dare I. He loved a scholar, I maintain them. Witness thyself now, because I saw thee have the wit to acknowledge those virtues to be mine, which indeed are. I have restored thy delineated, thank you, but shout out to that word.
Oh, Dylan.
Back in ruinous estate to those pretty clothes wherein thou now walkest. Okay. So, one, whoever this is totally showing that Sir Philip Sidney is the paradigm. Yeah, that he's the model. But whoever this is saying that I'm just as good as Sidney, except for these differences. So it could definitely be a reference to De Vere, and it could be tongue-in-cheek. But if Sidney is still alive after 86 and using an identity that, like, this is also super tongue-in-cheek and could be used in that reading as well. That I had a better leg. If Philip Sidney never actually got shot in the leg and that whole thing was faked, then, yeah, the living Philip Sidney has a better leg than the guy that died, you know? Because that's what the better leg line is. And that's a pretty, like...
And a more amiable face, kind of poking fun at the pox scars,
yeah,
too,
the pox scars and stuff like that. And so... I just want to point out, Sidney also visited Padua.
What about this part, too? But eagles waited on with every eye, and if they're saying that eagles are stood in for the Veers, right? As part of the thing. So
yes,
you're saying that eagles are literally...
Eagles also standing for the Stanleys, too.
Oh, okay.
So, like, that's what I get. Like, boar can be bacon or De Vere.
Yeah.
I don't want to, like, you know...
But porcupine.
Yeah, like, that's... Yeah, exactly. So Prechter doesn't mention that Hubert Langet references with "he loved a scholar." Clearly, the line about the leg is also very tongue-in-cheek. It's in a leg that didn't get shot off. I know Oxfordians have said this is lampooning, but I think things like this are quite possibly winks and nods at Sidney being still alive. Crazy, I know. Crazy enough to spend 150 euros on a copy of a manuscript. Not crazy enough to buy Bob Prechter's book, unless maybe I get some more Patreon donations.
Samuel Daniel is covered in Oxford's voices by 632 references, he
okay.
says.
All right. Well, he didn't in the free stuff that is online. It would be nice if he put some of this stuff online. Like, he doesn't even have on his website the list of the voices. I had to go and scan through all of his stuff to compile from his bolded words which ones were and weren't voices, and sometimes they're not always bolded, and that made me confused. Is Marlowe a voice or not? Thank you, Tom, but have you been listening? Regardless of any of this other stuff, Tom, what do you have to say about Thomas Dekker and Michael Drayton? What do you have to say about Stotsenberg connecting Dekker to Shakespeare? What do you have to say about Donna Murphy connecting Nash to Dekker, and furthermore connecting those to Shakespeare, which we didn't show, but she does? Yeah, I should read the book, and as soon as somebody can get me a free copy, I'm going to do it, dude. But
if you want to find part 2 of
this
video... As I
said, how about you go read Stotsenberg, bro? Stotsenberg was around before Prechter. How about you go read Donna Murphy, because what they have is far more compelling than a single thing I've seen from Prechter. If he's got the good stuff hidden away in the treasure trove of the book, it'd be nice for him to show it. But everything he's shown, I'm taking it apart. Okay? I will answer the appeal letters later. Once again, you're missing the point. What do you have to say about Decker and Shakespeare?
Yeah, doing the same thing as far as like answering the Lester stuff.
Yeah, dude. Like, what do you have to say about Shakespeare from 98 onwards? Let's just talk about that. Okay? If we're going to say that he is not in the Henslowe diary, that Shakespeare's not in the Henslowe diary, and that Oxford has nothing to do with those Henslowe writers, why all this stuff? Why all this overwhelming amount of evidence? Okay? What about that, Tom? What about that? That's what I'm answering, because Bob seems so darn sure that the Henslow's not connected to Shakespeare. We're showing that that's stupid and wrong, and he hasn't looked into it. Okay? You need to go read Stotsenberg. You need to go read Donna Murphy. I appreciate you coming in here and sharing and being a part of this, but I've been doing far more research than you have, probably as much as Prechter. Not cumulatively, but on average per day over the last 2 years, dude, there's not many people. There's really not. Okay? Henslowe could not mention Oxford. Maybe true, maybe not. But what do you have to say about Decker? Decker is the same writer. If anybody else is out there watching this on a repeat, you can go through the chat box and see why I'm frustrated. Okay? Alright. I'm saying that Oxford is Decker as opposed to what Prechter is saying. Prechter is saying Oxford can't be Decker because that would put him into collaborating with the Henslowe group. I'm saying Oxford
we already found all these parallels. They're
Oxford
definitely all over
Nash.
each other. Yeah.
Oxford is part of a lot of all those other early things he's saying, but Oxford becomes Decker into 98 and after when he's writing plays. Oxford is not also Drayton. Oxford is not also Webster. Oxford is not also Chettle. Those are different names, hence they have different names in the Henslowe diary. We need to figure out who those other names are. We will get to that in a second. But I need you to understand that Thomas Decker is one of the Shakespeare writers. We showed it. Nash is Thomas Decker. We showed it. Okay? What do we do with that information? We have to move past Prechter because Prechter won't go there. Sure, Tom. Okay. So, all this said, this is supposed to be an overview of Prechter's theory on Nash. I've spent so much time critiquing his theory that I haven't even relayed it yet. Like I said, go watch his videos. I think his stuff on Thomas Nash is super compelling. He has a prolific amount of output. I can't get to all of Prechter's stuff yet. There's a lot to cover with his theory. I can empathize that being a group theorist, it's hard to cover all this stuff. Okay? I appreciate all the work Prechter's put in. I appreciate that he's much better sport than, say, Professor Strittmatter. But I'm also beyond frustrated or disappointed with the stuff that I'm going over. There's a severe lack of literary acumen at work in his analysis, which is acceptable. He's not a literature professor. I expect that out of Stritt, which I'm also sort of disappointed with. What's actually more egregious is the sheer absence of logic at work. Because of these assumptions, like Oxford must be a solo writer, he has ignored the entire body of Henslowe writers, and I assume probably hasn't even picked up one of their plays, or poems, or pamphlets. Because if you do, you see it. You see it immediately. It's not hard. Okay? As soon as that happens, like, so much of his theory is kind of null and void, and I don't know what to do with it, guys.
Very, very incomplete. And then even if, once you start pitching that, because we're not even saying it's all wrong, we're just saying, like, it takes too many assumptions in that, even if you start to add in some of those Henslowe, like, you gotta, out of the 150 names, do we get to take out half of them? Is that more reasonable for someone to even to do that many voices or whatever? But then if we start to give that more of that ground, and I like that word parsimonious, which we always going to go back to, does this have to share? Yes, maybe Prechter has. Look at how many Samuel Daniel things that we can find between him and, I don't know what he's really comparing between Oxford's poetry, like how that's going to work exactly.
He's not doing a lot of
But how many other people can we start to find, like, oh, well, no, they have also parallel passages, or, if we want to start doing a tally here.
And Baconians have.
Right.
And, I'm trying to start it with Philip Sidney, but nobody other than Stotsenberg has tried to look into Philip Sidney, and I guess Elizabeth Quattrocki Knight sort of quasi looking into Philip Sidney. But Mary's doing it with Florio. You can do it with a lot of writers, and we need to sort of relook at the entire era, not just at Shakespeare, not just at Oxford. And I'm hypercritical of Bob Proctor because this has been an ongoing battle with Brady and I. We're not anti-Oxfordians. We never have been. We've been Oxfordians. I have. That's what got me into this from the start, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it just starts to be like, well, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Okay, I can. Well, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But people going, no, well, the Oxford Geneva Bible says that this. And it's like, well, what does that actually have to do? Well, no.
So, like, I don't know. So much of this has become every hang-up that I'm seeing coming from Oxfordians is coming from their hang-up that it's got to be Oxford and Oxford only. They won't look at anything from Francis Bacon because we know that Shakespeare's universally all one writer. Well, what do you have to say about Drayton and Decker? Because those are two different writers. If you want to say that those are both voices of Oxford, lump them on, but those two still collaborate with others yet. Do you want to lump on all of those writers? Because that's physically, humanly impossible. So what do you do with this?
Yeah, does it make more sense that one dude, I don't know. I feel like most people like the idea of the super genius and that someone could do this. Like, does it make more sense that one dude's coming up with 150, or does it make more sense that like 20, 25 guys are coming up with 150 over, a couple of decades and not one dude doing it? Yeah. Which one do we have to do more checks on? You have to do more checks to prove that none of my checks can outdo yours to make it fully, fully sound, right?
Here we go. Thank you, David. Attack Tom. So here's the thing. Like, I'm all for connecting internal passages back to Shakespeare. I want to go farther than mainstream authors and say that so much of that is more than just influence or commonplace. I want to say that we can have co-authorship, collaboration, identical authorship, whatever terms you want to use, that you can have that in Shakespeare. I don't know why people have become such religious purists about Shakespeare, because at some point, tell me what is and what isn't Shakespeare, because nobody else is going to agree with you exactly. Is the Passionate Pilgrims all Shakespeare poems? All 20 of them? Or just the 5 that mainstream scholars say? Or are you going to pick and choose? Or none of them? Or Phoenix and Turtle, is that Shakespeare too? Or maybe some of these plays, Locrine, Musidorus, Arden of Faversham, is that Shakespeare? When we say that Shakespeare is one person, what do we even mean by that? Which works are you saying are by one person? Are you saying the 38 canonical folio plays and then plus whatever random early plays you want to add on to your Oxfordian collection, plus the 2 long ones, plus sonnets, that's it? No other plays, but we're going to also include all that other Nash stuff. Like, when and where does it become Shakespeare? Because Sir John Oldcastle is printed as Shakespeare. That's written by Decker and Drayton. Yorkshire Tragedy, that's printed as Shakespeare. That's written by Middleton. What do we, Birth of Merlin, is Oxford part of that?
I like what David just said here. As far as yes, if he's multiple writers, is he just having a conversation with himself? And I already gave you the Oxfordian refutation. They'll be like, well, yeah, they're staging public discourse, and that there's a reason why they're doing all that,
right?
And expound upon yada yada yada.
Here's the thing, I totally think Oxford can be on both sides of those arguments, but I don't think it's only him. I think at that point it would be some political propaganda copy room where you get Oxford, Sidney, and Bacon, a bunch of guys pinning out the statements of both, and we got to get this released over here at this point, and then we'll release these in response, and we'll drum up this whole political propaganda
it's exactly
thing.
Like Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift going all right, well, you send this tweet on Monday, and then the next day I'll drop my platinum, and then I'll drum up my folks, and then they continuously do back and forth with one another. It's all calculated probably, but are we going to say that Billie Eilish and Taylor Swift are the same persons? No, but we're going to say they're probably of the same class doing something to people reading it.
Or they have the same PR person running their Twitter anyway.
That's a good one too, right?
And so, that said, pull me back to the slide.
Here we go.
I don't want to attack Bob too much more, but I I was hoping I'd get this like kind of cool Christian Bale character from like The Big Short, this super almost autistic, economic genius that's just super iconoclastic and cuts through all the noise with efficiency and creativity and outside of the box thinking. And there's maybe aspects of that, but I was surprised to find he much more seems to toe the company line. I know he goes much farther than a lot of Oxfordians, which I give him credit for, but like at the same time, he's really just pitching Loney and saying the things that everybody else is too scared to say. He's pitching Loney and then saying all these other things that are pointing to Oxford and related to Oxford maybe are just Oxford too. But it's not really going any farther than Loney, and he picks up the same anti-Sydney crap from Loney and Ogburn. And I don't know what the deal is with that, guys. Like, what is your personal beef with Philip Sidney, man? Like, dude's an awesome writer. Go read him. Let me see.
Yeah, and Robert Graves, interesting.
Interesting, yeah. Robert Graves, shout out I Claudius.
Yeah. Is he the same guy who wrote The White Goddess too? He wrote some like kind of metaphysical.
Could be. I've been meaning to get to I Claudius. Yeah. Shout out for that. Thanks. Let me see. I should have probably called it and stopped this after Prechter made his statements on Henslowe, and maybe shouldn't have gone on all that Daniel stuff, but I don't like the Daniel spot. Doesn't make much sense. I will look into it further, Tom, I promise. But the Henslowe stuff, that's like at some point he's not even really looking into Henslowe. He's clearly like brushing it aside and saying, well, do I need to spend...
whoa, he's like, how many plays? How many,
seriously,
how many plays do I have to read?
Do I want to spend my time on that? And that's kind of what I'm saying about going and reading Bob's book. It's like, look, I'm not saying it's total crap and that I should never read it. I'm just saying, like, I got to pick and choose my battles in this Shakespeare research.
I only got so much time to dedicate,
because there's so much stuff out there, and I get that. I totally get that. And I think a lot of Oxfordians have said the same thing. Like, look, all the stuff that's pointing to Oxford, it's in the 70s and 80s. Let me go look at Nash. Let me go look at Fisher's Folly. Let me go look at all that, because that's where it's pointing to me to, and that's where I'm getting answers. And if I go dig around the 90s and it's not making much sense and be wasting my time, so like I get it, but at the same time, all Oxfordians are all doing that. And like, yeah, Prechter does a good job with Nash specifically, but as soon as we get to Henslowe era stuff, he's mum on the subject. He doesn't really have anything to say about any of these people, what their connections or whereabouts are, or what their relationship is. And so I just want to point out a few more things that he says in some of his videos. He says that Thomas Nash is a rare talent because he comes up with a lot of neologisms, coining of new words like Shakespeare. Dude, everybody's doing that. Decker, Marston, Sidney, Florio, everybody's coining new words. They're all doing it. Let me see. And he also says meager output as far as describing Nash's given output, which yes, but if you go look at Donna Murphy, she says, well, he's in a bunch of Marlowe at least, so add that in. He also says some really weird thing that John Payne Collier proves that Nash isn't real because John Payne Collier forged Nash into the Henslowe diary. And so he's like, therefore we know that John Payne Collier's forging Nash to show that, because he couldn't find Nash and Nash didn't exist. Does that mean that Marlowe also didn't exist? And does that mean that John Marston also didn't exist? Because they're both forged into the diary by John Payne Collier too. So where does that reasoning stop and start? Says Shakespeare's recorded. He says Shakespeare's not recorded at grammar school, and neither is Thomas Nash. And then he lists off some names that are recorded, and that's how we know that they're who we know they are. And he lists Ben Jonson as one of them. Ben Jonson has never, ever, ever, ever been recorded at grammar school. Fun fact. Ben Jonson says in 1619 to William Drummond, where we get all those other baloney Ben Jonson quotes, that he had a Master Camden who was the headmaster
at the school that people say he went to, and so they use that quote to say that Johnson went there. But here's the thing. William Camden, the headmaster at that school that was Johnson's master, guess who he was best friends with? Sorry. William Camden's best friends with Philip Sidney and Fulk Greville.
Whoa.
Yeah, guys, come on. They went to school together, went to college together. Ben Johnson is not in the records, so Prechter was wrong there. Just saying. All right, let me continue. A few more notes. A few others that are never mentioned as having gone to grammar school, if we want to go down that line of reasoning. Michael Drayton, Thomas Decker, John Webster, George Chapman. So are all those writers of Oxford or like what, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
You got to be consistent here. I just want to point out, this is a Stratfordian quote, so I know, but it's a good quote. David Kathman, who we bring up in our future Shakespeare video, David Chandler brings up David Kathman in his essay. If you insist on disbelieving in William Shakespeare's authorship, fine, but then you have to also disbelieve in the authorship of most other Elizabethan and Jacobean authors of drama if you're going to be consistent. Oxfordians don't agree with that. I do. I 100% agree with that. I think you have to be completely consistent and go through all this literature, which is going to take a long time. It's going to be a booger. But you have to do that. You have to do that. And clearly Prechter has not done that with Decker or Drayton, or Chettle, or Webster, or Middleton,
because
or
there's
Chapman,
almost like very
or
little
Haywood.
to even take on it, you know.
Yeah.
'Cause like we said, Decker is like, oh, what are we gonna find, you know?
Hey, if it's not that much money, Tom, you're welcome to buy us a copy, brother.
If you've got PDF, send it to the email. We will not put it up for torrenting or anything like that. I don't know how many people are looking to buy Shakespeare material off the torrents these days or get stuff off there, but
Tom's saying that we're mudslingers and not scholars, but Tom has failed to respond to the questions about Decker or Drayton and how to resolve that with Prechter's theories.
he just says that Prechter cites Henslowe like 100 and something times or whatever.
That's great. That's fantastic. How does he resolve Decker or Drayton, whom he openly says in his website are not Shakespeare? So have fun with that. Okay. But this all leaves us at a crossroads with Prechter's theory. All of us except Tom Ditto. What to do with Prechter's theory? Let's go ahead and ignore our nullius in verba rule for a second and just grant that Prechter is correct and that Oxford is Nash. Let's just go ahead and do that. I'll give it to him. Oxford's Nash. You win, Prechter. Okay. Which I think a lot of y'all Oxfordians are on board with. Well, that means Oxford's Decker. Okay? As we saw earlier, Nash becomes Decker. Decker's in Shakespeare. Nash is in Shakespeare. Oxford is Nash.
Decker has tons of the Shakespeare title plays if you want.
Yeah, are y'all following this so far? So Nash is Decker, Decker is Shakespeare. Sorry, let me start from the start. Oxford's Nash, Nash is Decker, Decker's Shakespeare. You seen it? Okay, cool, awesome. And here's the thing, guys. Decker, by Stotsenberg's count, is the main hand in Shakespeare. Okay, so this doesn't really fly in the face of anything that y'all say. Decker is the main hand according to Stotsenberg. And sure enough, like the amount of internal citations, parallel passages, that stuff, you get more with Decker and then Drayton and then Chettle, and sure enough, that matches up with what you see in the Henslowe Diary. The Henslowe Diary shows that Decker and Chettle wrote Troilus and Cressida. The Henslowe Diary shows that Drayton, Munday, Webster, Middleton, and revisions by Decker are on Julius Caesar. The Henslowe Diary shows which writers are in Sir Thomas More. Sorry, that's a lie, but all the Sir Thomas More writers are attributed to Henslowe Diary writers. But you can do it with other ones. Taming of a Shrew. It's in there. Medicine for a Cursed Wife. There's other Shakespeare plays that are listed in the earlier section of Henslowe, where you don't get the author's names, but you get the box office counts and the date of being shown. As soon as we realize that Shakespeare isn't some separate entity from the Henslowe writers, but is a name to put on print for the conglomeration of Henslowe writers, and specifically a name to put on when those get put over for the Lord Chamberlain's men, a place like the Globe. That's what makes it a Shakespeare. Now, we'll have to go ahead and parse through a whole bunch to figure out who exactly is who, tie it back to the university wits theories, but we'll get into that. Let me see.
So yeah, Prechter. Tom is pitching that Prechter says that he discusses why Prechter says Decker is not Oxford. Prechter recognizes many writers are quote unquote independent, and Decker is one of them. But once again, we're still saying that they're all lifting lines from one another.
Okay. Explain to me how Decker's lines are all over Shakespeare and vice versa, and usually in Decker first. Okay? Explain to me why the overlap in the Henslowe diary with the same titles. Explain to me why the Nash overlap, and maybe I'll start talking. Until then, I got to go form a real evaluation despite your opinion on the subject. Okay. Please. Show me why Decker can't be Shakespeare, can't be Nash. I'm full willing. Clearly, we need to identify Drayton. Clearly, though not shown today, we need to spot Chettle, Haywood, Webster, Middleton, and maybe others like Hottenday, Marston, Johnson, Porter, etc. Perhaps all these writers are the names that history has given to them, and only Decker is a pen name for Oxford. But I supremely doubt it. And guys, this could be your scriptorium, by the way. I don't know why you're so versed in this. At some point, if Oxford's using a dozen plus pseudonyms, isn't it just possible that one other writer of the period is also using at least one pen name? And not a dozen plus, 150 plus. So Bob Proctor says 150 plus for Oxford, 0 for Bacon and Sidney, 0 for Greville, 0 for Dyer, 0. Okay, cool. Here's the thing. It's not like other names haven't been or aren't being put forward. Francis Bacon has had the same claim that Oxfordians claim for a long time, that he's writing Shakespeare and probably not just Shakespeare. Plenty of folks have brought forward other names: Dyer, Sidney, Neville, North, Manners, Rosley, Greville, Sidney, Stanley, Ross, Sackville, Florio, Raleigh, Amelia Linear Bassano, just to name a few or a lot. There's plenty more, but those already brought forward and yet to be brought forward. But there are many more that should be brought forward and have been brought forward that I haven't listed. So maybe we could do as Stephanie Hopkins Hughes, an Oxfordian, suggests and try to delineate if any other names could match up with any that I just listed. So if Thomas Deckard's Edward de Vere, maybe Michael Drayton, the Warwickshire man, is Fulk Greville, the Warwickshire man.
I thought Greville was from Warwickshire. Okay.
And remember, Fulk Greville says, "Remember me as the master of Shakespeare and Johnson." Okay, maybe we're getting to something. And here's the thing.
Wait. Wild pitch here. Oxford wrote that.
Okay, and Oxford could have written everything ever, period. Maybe Oxford's like God.
And that's why it's hard not to start joking and being a little facetious about this stuff. Because I think even Stephanie Hopkins Hughes would have been like, "Whoa, what is this theory? Come on,
yeah." And so maybe she's still around. I don't know. Okay. And also, Fulk Greville's super into history, so is Michael Drayton. Maybe there's some more there. I haven't done any internal stuff to follow that up. John Webster may be one of the Sidneys. I know Stephanie Hopkins Hughes herself has pointed to Mary Sidney. I'd like to point out Philip Sidney if we can get past that death date. Thomas Middleton. I think one of the Bacons, or maybe even Henry Neville, needs to be suggested, since Thomas Middleton's two most famous plays have Francis and Anthony as the main characters, or Francisca and Antonio, or some variation as the main characters, and those characters are always about disguising and hiding some secret truth or identity. Then we got Henry Chettle. Could be Edward Dyer or Philip Sidney. This is on the belief that Chettle is a continuation of Robert Greene, and that maybe Chettle is one of the main hands in Robert Greene. I'm not the first to say that. In fact, people of the time thought that Henry Chettle may be Robert Greene, as seen with his Kind Heart's Dream, a pamphlet where he has to write and say, "Hey guys, I didn't write Greene's Groatsworth's Wit. That was Robert Greene. I'm writing this pamphlet though." But here's the thing, the two read just the same. All right, Thomas Heywood. Could he be William Stanley? I don't know. The timelines match. They both live into the 1640s, whereas no one else does. Darby is supposed to be penning comedies circa 1600. Heywood does write for Darby's Men. Heywood's best play is about a guy that gets cuckolded by his wife. And Darby apparently got cuckolded several times by Elizabeth de Vere. Or Elizabeth Vere. Okay, and then maybe some other wild cards. Robert Wilson as Thomas Sackville. They're both old. John Marston, if that's a separate writer from Decker or Webster. Maybe it's a younger guy because it pops up on the scene later, so maybe Rossley or Manners. Ben Jonson, I don't know. I don't know what to say about Ben Jonson because that seems to me another one that's a collection. Sometimes it reads just like Decker. Sometimes it reads like Marston. Sometimes it reads like Shakespeare, so I don't know. Chapman, maybe Walter Raleigh. Chapman has been given as the rival poet in the sonnets, and people have attributed the full sail verse as pointing to Chapman, but people have also said that maybe that's a line to Raleigh, so I don't know. Chapman's also part of the School of Night Circle, as Raleigh is. I think the true power of synthesizing all these theories isn't just to delineate collaboration or to identify pen names from the 90s, which is also indeed uber powerful, but also connect it back to the 80s. So, as it stands, our understanding of the period is still marred by a disconnect that occurs early in the 90s. Up to 93, we only have university wits' names. You don't see Decker, Drayton, or any of those guys. It's all Lodge and Peel and Kidd and Marlowe up to 92, 93. And then after 97, you don't get any of those names. You only have the new names. And so there's this weird transition period between 93 and 97.
Just happening after a bunch of other stuff sort of happening too. It's not, yeah.
So up to 93, we only have those names. After 97, we only have those names. This could be all deemed organic, if not for some facts. One, William Shakespeare's name is printed for the first time right at the start of that transition period, 93. So his name gets printed as soon as they start retiring those other names. Okay? And it's printed on a play for the first time in what date? 97. Oh, that's when all those other guys start popping up. And so it's weird that Shakespeare's name kind of bookends this dark period. As Donna has shown, there's a continuing happening with at least two names from the 80s, Marlowe and Nash. Their words, phrases, ideas, plots, wry remarks, jabs all seem to continue in other writers after they die. There's a major shift in the dramatic companies and theaters, and they closed down in 93. So, like I said earlier, we get the reworking of all the acting companies. Too many of the playwrights are gone from premature deaths. The ones not dead inexplicably just retire, like Lilly and Lodge. This all seems to be right on the back of the Marpollet Harvey Nash wars, like these names or authors had worn up their welcomes and needed to be retired. This all seems to be leading up to the Bishop's ban in 99, which conveniently scrubs away pretty much all this information that we're looking for. Nash, more than anyone, seems to be the focus of the ban. You can go to the next one. This becomes a two-step process. Do it in whatever order you'd like. You match the Henslowe names with the university wit names, or vice versa, and then you match those combined names, so like Nash Decker, link it to an actual concealed author, Edward de Vere. Or do it in this order. Match Henslowe name to the concealed author, Decker to de Vere, and then match that with an earlier uni-wit name, or any combination of that. Now, it's probably the case that there are more writers in the 90s than the 80s, because you would expect more to pop up onto the scene and join it. That would only make sense as more folks like Rossley and Manners grow up under the de Veres, Sidneys, and Bacons and are inspired to do the same thing. Herbert's as well. So some later writers may not have earlier counterparts to match with. Though I don't think that the opposite is true. I think all these earlier names that are writing in the 80s, there's no reason they shouldn't be writing in the 90s. Even the old folks like Sackville and stuff, they live on in the 1600s. Unless someone like Leicester or Walsingham's penning stuff, I don't see it. So I think all these 80s voices or hands or whatever you want to call them should pop up in the later 90s and 1600s as well. I don't have any great guesses, but here's a preliminary model. So don't hold me to these names. These are just guesses. This is also early on. We all have to do work to put it together. Nash is Decker, maybe Lodge is Drayton, maybe Green is Chettle, as I said earlier. Maybe Lily becomes Webster, but there's a big gap in between the two, so I don't know what to say about that. I've also said maybe Lily becomes John Day, but John Day isn't around for all of it time either. He kind of disappears. Maybe Watson becomes Chapman, or Marlowe becomes Chapman, or Watson becomes Marston. Marlowe and Watson are close. Chapman and Marston kind of pick up on the darkness. But maybe Marston's just, like I said, a continuation of Nash. Another one that people don't put forward, but whatever happens to Gabriel Harvey? Why does he just disappear and stop writing in 1595? And then conveniently in 1596, some guy named Ben Jonson pops up on the scene. Well, if we're saying that Decker and Nash are the same person, and that Decker and that Nash person are constantly beefing with Gabriel Harvey, and then they're constantly beefing with Ben Jonson, and Ben Jonson pops on the scene right as Gabriel Harvey disappears, maybe there's a connection. And sure enough, Gabriel Harvey lines pop up all over Jonson. So, may have to dig into that at some point, folks. Kidd maybe becomes Haywood, something like that, although Kidd himself is very weakly attributed, so not sure how much I want to do that. This lacks account for Middleton, which could make sense if he's a younger figure. It's also completely possible that matching these early writers is not a one-to-one. It's Kidd, Marlowe, maybe even Green, maybe even Peele. Could be already conglomerate efforts, collaborative efforts, or just multiple hands. Also Watson, maybe like a Samuel Daniel, and just not a playwriting figure, so trying to match up his name as a dramatic author isn't necessarily exactly congruous. Okay, that's it. Concluding. How about you paraphrase it, Tom?
Yeah, because I was just telling you to send us the chapters. Like, you can just screenshot the chapters if you. I don't know if. I was assuming that maybe you had a PDF version, is why I was saying that. But yeah, I don't know if you have a. Then yeah, just use your phone, take the pictures of just that chapters, attach it on an email. We'll read the Decker. I would like to see what he has to say about the Decker chapter.
I would love to.
We'll compare notes. I mean, this is what
we'll make a sequel video.
I'm pretty sure that this is what a true scientist would like. It'd be like, go disprove my stuff. That's what real science is supposed to do. Here's my hypothesis. Go try to prove me wrong. And then if you can, then it must hold true or whatever. That's how this real investigation is actually supposed to happen. So yeah, and just because Prechter references Decker 177 times, like, who cares? How many times?
Yeah, what's his point?
Yeah, he's not. That number doesn't prove anything.
So yeah, we will look into it
because
we do want people to come in with a dialectic, but don't come shouting in that we're mudslinging anti-scholars.
Yeah, we're trying to say, hey, we preface with the material we're going to dive into.
Nash was a mudslinger too. It's fine.
I am a Thomas Nash, so I can do that.
So yeah, that said, of course, that model that I gave is uber oversimplified. That's way oversimplified. You're not going to really ever get a perfect one-to-one, but these authors, as they pop up, I'm guessing all have multiple hands in them, and whichever one does pop up the most, maybe you can give it to them. Okay. This could ultimately open the door. Sorry, let me go back. So, can we please go beyond strip matter and Prechter and start being more open to group theory? I think Decker, Drayton is enough to show that Shakespeare's multiple hands. I think Nash into Decker shows that there is a connection to these university wit stuff. And I think Prechter shows that Nash is Oxford makes a lot of sense for a concealed author. And so can we synthesize these three and start trying to line up what is actually happening in the heyday of Shakespeare? The 1590s, 1600s, the actual time that they're famously performed, part of the King's Men, part of the Lord Chamberlain's Men. Can we please look at that? We've had 100 years of Oxfordian investigation. We need that same kind of effort happening for other people. And yeah, we've had a bunch of Bacon stuff, but Baconians and Oxfordians have been so against trying to link with each other that they're doing each other a disservice. Like, we need to start linking together, having a dialectic to get through this, because ultimately we need to overturn the academic consensus. Sitting there and sticking your heels in the mud saying, oh, no, it's my guy, it's my guy, it's my guy. We've had 100 years of that. Can we please change the paradigm, not just on the candidacy or claimancy, but of the whole discourse. So notice, I'm the Sydney guy. I'm not pitching my guy as the only guy. In fact, I was pitching Sydney as maybe Webster or Chettle, who are clearly inferior to Decker and Drayton as far as either quality or quantity. So, like, I'm not sitting here saying, it's only my guy. It's got to be my guy. And I'm not even sitting here saying, it's got to be mine because this is my theory. This is three other people's theories that have been out there and we've been talking about for a year. I'm doing this because I think this is the right answer and it makes sense and it would open the doors to a lot of stuff. Maybe there's some stuff wrong with what I'm saying, but we got to look into it. If we do what Prechter's doing and categorically discount the Henslowe writers, we're not going to get there. So we could ultimately open the door to answering maybe what's happened with the War of the Theaters, the Pamphlet Wars 2, the Apocrypha, many other attribution problems outside of Shakespeare proper. The disappearance of the university wits, the mysterious beginnings of the Henslowe writers, the seeming conflict of Shakespeare candidates, the stylistic divergence or disunity in many works and canons. We went through that with Marlowe. We're doing that all the time with Shakespeare. The frontman process. Maybe we could understand how it is that L&Ms start to work and don't work, especially on this sort of industrial commercial level. Or maybe some deeper questions like the role of the state or the deep state.
And even stuff like Essex Rebellion, like what factions are actually involved here? Like what's the actual play? What's the profane reading? What's the sort of initiated reading on some of these events and whatnot? And is there any connection to some of the, obviously the Baconians will like connections to the Freemason, Rosicrucian movements, and like what does any of that have to do with any of this stuff?
Right. And I just don't think that there's much framework for doing that with a solo Oxford theory other than Oxford just wants to Mozart all of this. That if any of this is happening, it's just coming out of his Mozart brain. And so here, with what we said, you can still say De Vere is the ringleader, Decker is the main hand. Scroll down just a little bit. Or scroll up. Yeah, there you go. And now we have a veritable supergroup. A veritable Renaissance-era literary Avengers or Justice League of superhumans with secret identities and all. I think that's tons of fun. I don't know why more people aren't excited about that. So, here's a quick visual analogy to explain co-authorship or collaboration, whatever term you want to use. We can think of each writer's cumulative style as a distinct color. And by the way, this is by no means exactly accurate. This is a loose analogy. And so we got Decker, Marston, Middleton, Drayton, Munday, Chettle. They're all distinct different colors. You can tell their style from each other for the most part. Maybe there's some that are similar. Munday and Drayton, there's some similarity because they write together a lot. Okay. But you can still tell they're different colors, right? We can think of those colors as a layering of, like, transparency layers. And so, like, if you piece together all the works of an author's canon, it adds up to this distinct color, right? Or if you add up all the acts or scenes in a play to a play, it adds up to this distinct color, right? Well, what happens with Shakespeare? Because we got all these colors. Shakespeare's one color. These are these colors. Scroll down just a little bit. Yeah, keep going. So, if we overlay these writers on each other, we will get a cumulative profile. The profile matches our Shakespeare profile above. Yet none of these writers on their own look exactly like Shakespeare. So I took all those names previously and layered them into a transparency to get this sort of, atomic looking thing. And the middle color, that's the cumulative color that stands out. That's the style that we sort of try to unify because we believe authorship. When we read something, we try to unify it in our brains. It's the textual unity. That's what it's going to look like. And sure enough, all those colors are the exact same colors that Shakespeare colored. And I know I made the colors match up, but the point is for the analogy that when you overlay all these Henslowe names, sure enough, in different combinations, they look like different versions of Shakespeare. So if you overlay Webster, Decker, and Middleton, you get this particular shade of Shakespeare, and that's called a Macbeth. Or when you overlay those same names but add in Drayton and Munday, it gives it a little bit different color. And that's what we call Julius Caesar. And sure enough, Macbeth's kind of like Julius Caesar, but it's not exactly, right? Like, if it was, Caesar'd be a way more evil figure, right? We don't get that. Othello. Othello's similar to Macbeth. It's got this revengey stuff, but it's a little more humor in it, right? That's maybe because we have Marston instead of Middleton. That makes sense. Marston's funnier than Middleton. Okay. Measure for Measure. Measure for Measure reads a lot differently than a lot of plays, but maybe that's because it's Chettle and Haywood and not the Decker-Drayton combo as usual. Scroll down just a little more. And then, yeah, Richard III.
Oh, my bad.
Richard III. Similar color to Julius Caesar or Macbeth, but slightly different because, yeah, we got Decker and Drayton and maybe even Johnson or something like that. And then similar thing with Hamlet, similar thing with Troilus. But all these final colors, other than Measure for Measure, which is a little too blue, they all kind of look like the Shakespeare color. So they all just cumulatively start to look like this unified thing, but it's coming from this combination of distinct different styles. And we know that happens with Sir Thomas More. We know that for a fact. That's what was being done with Sir Thomas More. If Sir Thomas More had been printed, it would just be printed as Shakespeare. It wouldn't get any or all of these names. That said, this is just a little visual for you guys that are struggling. Like, how do I... It's all so unified.
It's only unified because, you're looking at a super highly edited version of it, and you're not seeing, you're missing the parts, or you're missing the trees for the forest type deal, or whatever, you're not realizing the components of the forest is made up of all these. Oh, yeah, that's definitely a forest, all right, but it's like, this forest has these kind of trees, and it's got more oaks, and sure, you see the trees, but this one's got ash trees, and so it's not going to look this, but they both got the heath bushes down here, so that makes,
It's, I don't know, it's one of these optical illusion things that, those pictures that you stare at and then the thing pops out.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of that. Everybody's only seeing the thing that pops out and they're not seeing the underpieces. That's true for some of Decker's playwriting, but it's not true for all of Decker's playwriting. Go read more Decker. That kind of answer to me just shows that people aren't reading enough Decker. And that also sort of is not acknowledging that there are other hands in Shakespeare. Okay, maybe Nash, but Shakespeare maybe should be more poetic because it's more than just Decker's poetry. That said, Decker doesn't really ever expressly write poetry, so if Oxford is doing that, it could be under the Shakespeare moniker or other monikers, sure. Okay, so, dude, you're not reading enough Stotsenberg. Stotsenberg writes as much or more than Prechter, so there. Two can play at that game. Have you read any Donna Murphy?
My big brother can beat up your big brother.
No, hold on. Seriously, let me talk about my big brother for a second. Because, have you read every play in Shakespeare's Apocrypha? I have. Have you read all of Michael Drayton's sonnets? Have you read all of Samuel Daniel's sonnets? I have. Have you
read Buckridge's theories? Have you read Stephanie Hopkins Hughes' theories? Have you read Donna Murphy's theories? Have you read, not just like one dude. It's like, we can take some of that, but it's not a Bible for what the truth is. It's like just one component of many things that need to be compared and contrasted against one another.
Who
else did we yes.
I just finished reading Hoffman's Tragedy today by Chettle. It's fantastic, guys. Go read it. It's freaking awesome. It's a kind of a funner, sillier take of Hamlet. Let me see. I don't know. Have y'all read any Philip Sidney?
I think
I've read everything by Philip Sidney.
We need to put a fight between, no offense, shots coming at Baconians here, but we need to put Prechter and one of these other super Baconians where they'll be like, Bacon writing some of that stuff. Yeah, Philip Sidney, he didn't write that. Bacon wrote that. You think that guy wrote that? Bacon wrote it. And it's like, we got to have these two guys who think that their guys wrote everything and put them in the room together.
And then the winner faces off against Bash and Conrad. Multiple pseudonymity champion. It's not. All of John Lilly. I'm trying to read everything that I possibly can.
He says Oxford's not Decker, and at this point, we don't even care if Oxford is Decker. We care that Nash is Decker. We care that Decker is part of Shakespeare. We care that Nash. It's like, Oxford doesn't even have to enter this equation for it to really matter.
I'm giving you Oxford, but if you don't want to have him in there, we can throw him out. I'll throw them out real quick. But Prechter's very clear. Oxford's not Decker. Yeah, we're very clear that Nash is Decker, and so if Oxford is Nash, then Oxford is Decker. Resolve that, please. Go ahead. Pull up the Passionate Pilgrim while I'm on here. I know it's been 3 hours, but those other slides that I sent you.
Oh no, I don't think we should.
Pull it up.
No, it's going too.
Pull it up. They're quick. They're quick.
Oh, I'm gonna have to do a bunch of because I don't have any of that stuff on here though. Save it for another day, man. You lost your hat like an hour and a half ago.
Yeah. just saying. I went through the Passionate Pilgrim poems yesterday, and there were two that I could immediately spot. And poem number 7 is clearly Edward de Vere. So there we go. We have Edward de Vere, not some indirect through a pseudonym thing, but Edward de Vere directly, his identifiable writing in a Shakespeare publication. Number 17. Poem number 17. You'd think that'd be de Vere, but it's not. Poem number 17 is Philip Sidney. It's absolutely identifiable.
He trolled de Vere. If someone was like, "Hey, what number do you want?" He's like, put me down for 17." He's go, "Oh, Oxford's gonna hate that."
Remember, if
his number.
If I think that Philip Sidney fakes his death, that's an interesting date to fake your death on, October 17th. So just saying. But those two poems seem clearly to me to be by those two authors. Mainstream authors don't cite them. I don't see any Oxfordians talking about either of those two poems. But I'm able to go do that because I'm open to this group theory thing, and I'm looking at not just de Vere, I'm also looking at Philip Sidney. If I was looking at more than those two, I probably could spot some other ones. I think Edward Dyer is probably Richard Barnfield, and is doing the Richard Barnfield stuff in there. There we go. If we look at poem number 17, my flocks feed not, my ewes breed not. That's for me, it's a for sure 100% verifiable Philip Sidney poem. We can go through internal evidence to show that. Same thing with poem number 7. We can go through, scroll up just a little bit, and you can spot it by title, guys. Fair is my love, but not so fair as fickle. It's 100% Edward de Vere. Nobody else would write that title. 100% de Vere. But it's unknown to everybody because nobody's made that spot. Because, mainstream scholars don't want to get those names in here. And the rest of us sackers are all stuck looking at other stuff and trying to pitch only our guy. And since this isn't all by one guy, who cares? But as soon as you realize all these are all Shakespeare writers, and that's why they're all getting printed as Shakespeare, that makes sense. Some look less like Shakespeare because it's not the writers of the sonnets, or it's less popular writers, or they're doing a whole different take. But this is all Shakespeare writers. And I'm sure you and Prechter are right about William Adlington. I'll take that one at face value. But we have to resolve Decker and Drayton. Sorry if I got a little hyperbolic or a little worked up. And thank you for sticking around, Tom. You've been very steadfast with your questions and comments.
You're deep. If you're bringing up flamenco, we can talk. We can have a conversation.
Yeah.
No one's that's not going to be something that we
don't have
throw out there.
Get any animosity going. Just these natural defensive hackles get brought up in this Shakespeare authorship question, and especially no shots fired, but Oxfordians themselves have had to be uber defensive. I totally understand it. I get that way with Stratfordian types and my more mainstream friends that start to doubt me or groan when I pitch my theories. That said, thank you guys for sticking around. This one's a long one, a 3-hour one. Did not mean to make it go that long. But this needed to be done. We needed to get these ideas out there that, we can say all of these things, but we need to resolve them because all three seem to have a fair amount of pretty conclusive internal evidence as far as I'm concerned. I get pretty convinced with good internal evidence. For me, you don't need that much external evidence. If you have the same stylistic traits popping up over and over and over in mass in these groups that you can categorize, then that's probably one hand. And yes, people can fake each other, they can steal lines, but you can't do that for, whole bodies of work. And so I do think that Prechter's totally right to say, hey, look, all these writers are overlapping. We need to look into that. And I don't think he's wrong to say Nash could be Oxford or is Oxford. I just think that he is wrong and incomplete once he gets to the Henslowe era, and he is specifically hitting that wall because of his assumption about solo authorship and because of an Oxfordian aversion to collaboration. Once we get past that hurdle, I don't really think that there's all that much to resolve, and I think this is all fine. And Prechter just needs to amend what he says about Decker and Drayton and rework his theory as far as understanding Oxford as a collaborator, as the head of a scriptorium of concealed writers. But as soon as you do that, all of a sudden, the annuities make tons of sense. All the secrecy, the layers on layers of pseudonym on pseudonym, all that starts to make sense if you say, hey, this is a whole factory of concealed authors. And it makes sense that we have to be uber secret about it if people like Philip Sidney are faking their deaths to be part of it, or if other pen names like Edmund Spencer are pen names and have been taken at face value to be people, and people have come in people like Gabriel Harvey. He's supposed to give speeches and stuff at Oxford University or Cambridge University. So if that guy's giving speeches and he's not really a real guy, who the heck was that guy? So I don't know. A lot of that may explain why there's so many layers of secrecy, but yes, this does get into the big nasty C word. Conspiracy. I don't know if you're born past a certain year, or I don't know if you're like me or Brady and you watch enough Adult Swim or something. I don't know. Stuff like conspiracies isn't some dark, twisted affront to science or history. It's a way of being on the fringe and questioning the stuff that we think we know but don't absolutely know that we know.
Yeah, being flexible in our assumptions sometimes,
Yeah, Martin, I definitely need to do more Mary Sidney stuff. I've been doing so much Philip stuff, and I haven't really... I'm surprised I haven't gotten to touch Mary all that much. But so much of Mary's output is post-Phillips era. And so I need to get to the bottom of that. Let me see...
We definitely always kind of talk and give her... she's definitely in the scene. And
yeah.
We definitely, she's totally involved with all the publications of the Arcadia and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And what does that have to do with the new Arcadia versus, what does any of
that
mean?
Housing Samuel Daniel and
yeah.
So, her kids being the dedicatees.
Yeah. That's another big red flag too. Yeah. Why is a folio dedicated to the Herberts? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not like every play is just dudes with chainsaws. There are literally plays where a girl fakes that she's a guy, and in one of those plays there's a part where a lady named Maria or Mary fake writes something as some other person. So there's some clues there,
Yeah.
That said, I've been pushing Bacon and Mary and Florio off just because Florio less, but Bacon and Mary are a little younger. I've been trying to get to Oxford and Sydney mostly. Been trying to also look at Greville a little bit and Dyer a little bit. But, thank you guys for tuning in. Hope that this was convincing. Yeah, this was a long one. But it was a good one. And it needed to be done.
Many voices requires many analyses.
Yeah, and sorry if I pushed some Oxfordian buttons on this one today, because I know a lot of y'all get really amped up about your theories. But
who's out there really who's bringing this content, this really contentious Shakespeare debate here? You okay? You're not gonna get that same type of comedy or pay-per-view weigh-in like you will here.
I have seen that quote about Raleigh. The Ben Jonson thing with Raleigh is even weirder because apparently at one point Raleigh's son was riding Ben Jonson around on his shoulders or on his back, and Ben Jonson was fat and drunk and his clothes are falling off, and the kid's yeah, horsey, yeah, and it's supposed to be his tutor or something. Yeah,
it just sounds ridiculous, and anything from Ben Jonson seems to be tongue in cheek.
Yeah, everything from Johnson's just that happened. No way. I don't know. So yeah, excellent point. Soltron. I want to get back to Ben at some point. I keep circling around Ben. I don't know what to do with Ben. He's so distinct in that he keeps so much to these unities, and I don't know, this War of the Theaters, it seems like it's just Ben Jonson versus everybody else. You got Decker, Middleton, Marston, maybe even Shakespeare, which we don't think is a separate writer. We showed it's not a separate writer, but people think
the narrative of it anyway.
Like 4 writers versus Ben. Like Chapman, seems to usually side with Ben, but never seems to speak on his behalf or write any plays in the matter. And so it's just like Ben versus the world, and it's like, what's going on there? Like, why is he so outside this group? And it's like, I don't know, it just mirrors so much to me what is happening with Harvey and Nash. You get Nash, Lily, Green, all these exact same names that we were saying the same as these Henslowe writers. All of them are ganging up against Harvey, and Harvey's taking them all on by himself. Ben Jonson does the same thing. Ben Jonson got Harvey all over his stuff. What's happening here, folks? Yeah. What's happening?
What does this have to do with S6 factions? I'd be really interested in. Yeah, how is any of this playing out, and for what reasons?
Yeah.
You know? Super interested to find out. But with that, Chance has regathered himself. Gathered himself back up.
Recollected, refreshed, rejuvenated.
And if you want to see this next week, make sure you join us over on Patreon so we can get Chance out here every week to read some expensive books, $100 books and manuscripts from Oxford, and we'll come argue and we'll have a good time.
Because, dude, and not just one last note on the price of Prechter's book, that there are other books out there that I desperately want to buy, and I just don't want to pony up over $100 or $100 on it. So, Gilbert Slater, which I'll mention in the next video, but Gilbert Slater is an Oxfordian. He's one of the Oxfordians. He's president of the Oxford Society and stuff, along with Percy Allen and B.M. Ward and J. Thomas Looney. Gilbert Slater, he's one of the guys. His book on Shakespeare is called 7 Shakespeares. 7 is... That's more than one, right, Brady?
I did a lot of math this
I got Brady as my resident math expert, but 7 Shakespeares, and he includes most of the names that you'd think. Walter, it's pretty much the Delia Bacon crew. Walter Raleigh, Francis Bacon, Edward de Vere, Thomas Sackville, Mary Sidney, and I forget who the other two are, but he does not include Philip Sidney. He does not. But I would love to get that. It's not copyright free for another 8 years, and so I can't get it unless first edition. It's $170. Brady tried to get me a copy of Alden Brooks's The Dyer's Hand from 1943, also not going to be available for copyright for a while. And Brady's like, dude, I found it online for $6. Here you go, dude. Merry Christmas. And I was like, oh, thanks, dude. And it was W.H. Auden's The Dyer's Hand, which is also a book about Shakespeare, but not really about authorship. He was a poet and talking about Shakespeare's poetry, but Auden sounds like Alden. I see the disconnect, but but yeah, if he was like, oh well, let me just go try and get you that book then, and he did, and it's like, oh, it's $145. Oh, well, you can't get it. You don't get it, Chance. It's like, all right, I don't have it, and I still don't have it. I haven't gotten to read it. The most I know about it is that Hemingway was convinced by it, and Hemingway thought that Edward Dyer was in Shakespeare. And the other thing I know about it is that Oxfordians did a huge Stratfordians did a huge smear campaign against it, so it didn't really get to see the light of day. That said, Maxwell Perkins, the great famous editor, helped work on it and tried to push it. So, yeah. So, look, I would love to spend money on that kind of stuff. I can't. I'm a teacher. I don't make that kind of money. And once I do have that money, Prechter will get on the list, but he's not towards the top of the list. I got to go get those books. So, yeah. That said, maybe we'll try and shoot Bob an email and see if we can get it so that we can make an emendation of this if anything needs to be amended, indeed. But I think our point stands, regardless of us reading. He's categorical about Decker not being in Shakespeare, categorical about Decker not being Oxford. that's wrong. So what do we do with it? Okay. Sign us out, Brady. Let's GTFO out of here.
All right, guys. Yeah, thanks so much for staying with this epic long one. I think this was a great one and I like this sort of style and format, second chance on them, and having me do the math counting on the side. You got 2 points on this one, Chance. So no, it was a good time, and I think because this one had been pitched to us a lot, and I think it's a good one because, it's like the same thing as sort of like it's not the exact same as a Shakespeare take or a Stratfordian take per se, but yeah, there's a lot of arrogance like sucked out of the room, and this seems to be the one that did it the most. It's like it's one of the things for Oxford to be like, oh yeah, well he wrote all it, or Sydney's not a part of it. Okay, and then some guy being like, oh no, all those plays that Chance can't even figure to get out to, like all one dude. It's like, wow, man, it's like. That's pretty hard, I was like, we're struggling to, I don't know.
So, and then, meanwhile, people like Bash and Conrad, like, just take everything Prechter says and just put Marlowe in for Oxford.
Yeah,
and apparently it works. So, what's happening there?
Otherwise, it was a great episode. I think we'll probably try to find more ones like this later on. Yeah, because that's what real science is. No offense, we gotta step on toes. We gotta. Yeah. I mean, we'll have it done to us too. I'm sure at some point would be nice. Actually.
Tom's trying.
And so and that's the whole point. If we really want to find the truth, if that's actually your goal, then this is not a mudslinging thing. Hopefully, it's us being like, here's where we really have a problem with this. Like, here's where we laid it out. Of why.
Tom, don't watch the strip matter video, bro.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah.
Both videos.
And so, or maybe it was the one before that. Yeah, it's the one before, the Marlowe one, maybe. I forget.
No, it's the Sydney versus Oxford.
That's right. Okay.
Also, there was one more quote that Bob Proctor pissed me off with. He said, "Sorry, it wasn't even Bob Proctor. I'm lying. It was Hank Whittemore. But I think Bob is taking something that Hank said because Bob was saying that Oxford was fluent in Greek." And I'm like, oh, this is news to me. Okay, Oxford's fluent in Greek. Cool. That may answer some questions. And indeed, he may be, but what was his citation for it? Prechter didn't have any citations. I searched around. The only one I could find was Hank Whittemore. And indeed, Hank Whittemore's citation was just showing that Stephanie Hopkins Hughes showed that De Vere's tutor, Sir Thomas Smith, De Vere's tutor when he was like 5 to 12 years old, was a Greek scholar. And so it's like, okay, it stands to reason that he would have taught De Vere some Greek, but De Vere was also just a little kid at that point. Would he have kept using the Greek? Did he actually do it? Do we have any actual tangible evidence like we do with Philip Sidney that proves Oxford actually knew or cared about Greek? Well, I do think that there's enough to suggest that it probably is the truth, but
it's just not as good of a truth claim as the Philip Sidney one, right? It's like, your guy's doing it, but I even hate to go to those terms, but it just seems to be one of those cases in this circumstance that it's like, okay, you got a point there, but like if you want to call that a point, what do you think about this point? Does it weigh a little harder? Oh, Oxford's got so many dedications. It's like, okay, well, Sidney, look, I keep finding all these dedications that he's got tons of in the time period that seem to be pretty relevant to a Shakespeare question.
Like Soltron has brought up many times, like no matter how laudatory any of these things are about anybody, none of them seem to be as laudatory as what people say about Bacon later on in I've already forgot the text name. It comes out 1626. But
Turtle? Well, no, I'm thinking.
Yeah. And so indeed, Hank Whittemore suggests that Greek texts were around in the Cecil House, but
once again, you're on. Yeah, it's a nice lead, but guess what? Sydney's also at the Cecil House. Okay, they can both take that claim. Now, what's the next
Francis
point?
Bacon
what's the next following?
House,
right? What's the next following point? Okay, they were all there. Great.
Henry Neville is also at the Cecil House.
Hey, look,
House.
Sydney's actually been found
Henry
translating
Rosley,
that stuff.
Also at the Cecil House.
Yeah. All candidates.
Roger Manners, also at the Cecil House. So, yes. There. Just trying to keep this in context, not have isolation on De Vere or isolation on Shakespeare. Keep it full, big picture, whole scope. It's tough to do. There's a lot of stuff. Prechter is wide as he covers. He can't cover wide enough because he has to stop once he gets to Henslowe. So yes, I'm aware that Edward de Vere grew up in the Cecil household. Yes.
But we just named a bunch of other dudes that were also there too. So
Yeah,
why don't they
and,
also get that exact same point? Is what we're just
Vere
saying.
didn't really live at the Cecil household as a kid. He lived with Smith. He lives at the Cecil household a little later, but that's where he could have continued his Greek. I totally agree. But I just wanted to point out that we don't actually have any direct evidence, as far as I know. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, a lot of good metadata points.
Yeah.
Like, look, very close proximity to a Greek scholar stands good reason. Now, once again, Philip Sidney also studying directly from the Greek, and we actually have direct evidence that he's doing that. So it's a much stronger insinuation that he's much more fluent, that he's much more engaged with it.
Right, and like at some point, of course, they're probably all fluent, right? Like these are some hoity-toity people, and yeah.
But yeah, if you just want to if that's the point you want to give de Vere,
Yeah,
you
be
have
fair.
to consider that
Be fair.
by those parameters, Philip Sidney also gets that point. Like,
Yeah.
that's the point I'm trying to make.
So, okay, and yeah, I'd love to know what text that is or where to find that. That said, Hank Whittemore should have probably cited that.
But yeah, we don't want to continue.
Yeah,
we'll keep saying
yeah.
goodbye forever.
Yeah.
But we'll come back again. Maybe we'll have a Prechter revisit or something like that. Otherwise, we'll visit the poems later on and do some more of this. But I guess on this note, hope to see you around again. Check out all the links below. Consider donating and joining the Patreon to continue us coming on here and bringing some more research to y'all.
Look forward to it, Tom. Thank you, dude.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming by and everyone else. And to all a good night and